3 silver coins. That's all it took to buy a human life in the summer of 1887. The auctioneer's gavel hung in the air, waiting for someone, anyone, to claim the trembling girl on the platform. Her name was Lila Monroe, 19 years old, eyes hollow with resignation. The crowd of ranch hands and drifters saw only merchandise, but when a tall cowboy in a dusty black hat stepped forward with 3 coins, something impossible happened. He knelt, and the girl who had learned to stay silent finally screamed, not from terror, but from something far more dangerous: hope. If you want to know how a girl sold for the price of a loaf of bread became a woman who chose her own destiny, stay until the very end. Drop a like and comment your city so I can see how far this story travels. Now, let's begin. The barn smelled of hay, sweat, and cruelty. Lila Monroe stood on a wooden crate in the center of the structure, her bare feet aching against the splintered surface. The late afternoon sun sliced through gaps in the barn walls, illuminating dust motes that danced like indifferent witnesses to her humiliation. Around her, perhaps 30 men formed a loose semicircle: ranch hands with calloused palms, merchants with calculating eyes, drifters with nothing to lose and everything to take. She kept her gaze fixed on a knot in the floorboards 6 feet away. If she didn't look at their faces, she could almost pretend this wasn't happening. Almost. "Gentlemen! Gentlemen!" The auctioneer, a pot-bellied man named Silas Crow, spread his arms wide like a ringmaster at a circus. "I present to you Miss Lila Monroe, recently of the Denver Foundling Home. 19 years of age, healthy as a horse, and—" he paused for dramatic effect, his yellowed teeth showing in a grin. "Untouched. A virgin bride for the discerning gentleman who appreciates purity." A ripple of laughter rolled through the crowd. Lila's jaw clenched. She had learned, over the past 3 weeks since being transported from Denver, that silence was survival. Every word she spoke could be twisted, used against her, so she had stopped speaking entirely. "Now, I know what you're thinking," Crow continued, circling her slowly. "Why would a pretty young thing like this need selling? Well, the Foundling Home, they don't have the resources to keep girls past 17, and Miss Monroe here, she's had some difficulty finding suitable employment." More laughter. Lila's fingernails bit into her palms. Difficulty finding employment. That was one way to describe what happened when you rejected your employer's advances and got thrown into the street for it. When you showed up at the next house looking for work and were turned away because word had spread that you were troublesome. When hunger became so acute that you traded your last possession, your mother's silver locket, for a week's worth of bread. "Let's start the bidding at $10 silver," Crow announced. Silence. The men shuffled their feet, studied their boots. $10 was apparently too steep for a human being. Crow's jovial expression tightened. "Come now, gentlemen. That's less than you'd pay for a decent mare, and Miss Monroe here can cook, clean, mend—" "Can she keep her mouth shut?" someone called out. More laughter. Lila felt heat crawl up her neck, but she didn't move, didn't react. She had become very good at not reacting. "I can assure you," Crow said, his voice taking on an edge, "Miss Monroe is exceedingly cooperative." The word hung in the air like a threat. Lila knew what it meant. She had seen what happened to girls who weren't cooperative at the Foundling Home. The basement rooms where screams were muffled by stone walls. The girls who returned with empty eyes and new bruises, or who didn't return at all. $5, a voice finally called. A man in his 50s with a tobacco-stained beard. $5! Crow seized the bid like a lifeline. "Do I hear 6? Silence again. The man with the beard grinned, revealing gaps where teeth should be. Lila's stomach turned over. She had learned to read men's faces, to catalog the different types of danger. This one was the worst kind, the kind who enjoyed fear, who would find pleasure in breaking what little spirit she had left. 5 going once. Lila's breathing quickened despite her determination to stay calm. $5. That's what she was worth. $5 to be purchased by a man who looked at her the way a cat looks at a cornered mouse. 5 going twice. A movement at the back of the barn caught her attention. A tall figure stepped through the doorway, silhouetted against the bright afternoon light. She couldn't make out his features, only that he was broad-shouldered and walked with the unhurried confidence of someone who knew exactly who he was. 3 silver coins, the figure said. The crowd erupted in murmurs. Crow's face reddened. Son, the bid is already at $5. I heard you. The man moved closer, and Lila caught her first clear look at him. He was younger than most of the men here, maybe 30, with a weathered face that suggested a life lived outdoors. His dark hair was too long, touching his collar, and several days of stubble shadowed his jaw. But it was his eyes that struck her, gray as storm clouds, and completely calm. 3 coins is what I'm offering. That's an insult, the tobacco-beard man sputtered. I already bid 5. Then pay 5, the stranger said mildly. He didn't look at Lila, hadn't looked at her once. But I'm betting you've got maybe $2 in your pocket, and we're hoping Crow here would extend you credit. Tobacco Beard's face purpled, which told Lila everything she needed to know. The stranger was right. Crow scrambled to salvage the situation. Now, see here, we can't just— 3 coins, the stranger repeated. He reached into his pocket and produced 3 silver coins, letting them catch the light. Take it or leave it. I've got better things to do than stand in this barn watching you pretend that man has money he doesn't have. The crowd had gone silent. Crow looked between the stranger and Tobacco Beard, clearly calculating. 3 coins was insulting, barely worth the effort. But 3 coins was real money right now, and Tobacco Beard was still sputtering without producing any currency. This is highly irregular, Crow muttered. So is selling human beings, but here we are. The stranger's tone remained conversational, but something in it made Crow's hand twitch toward his belt. Then the moment passed, and Crow seemed to deflate. Fine. 3 coins. But you take her as is, no complaints later. Wouldn't dream of it. The stranger crossed to Crow and dropped the coins into his palm with a soft clink that seemed to echo in the sudden quiet. Just like that. 3 pieces of silver, and Lila's life had a new owner. She waited for him to turn to her, to examine his purchase, to assert his ownership the way she'd seen men do with livestock at market. Waited for the proprietary gleam in his eye, the hand reaching for her arm, the beginning of whatever nightmare came next. Instead, he turned and walked toward the barn door. Crow blinked. Wait, you're not going to— She can walk, can't she? The stranger paused at the door, finally glancing back. His eyes swept over Lila briefly, and she couldn't read the expression there. Come on then, if you're coming. I'm not carrying you. Lila's mind went blank. Come on then, if you're coming. As if she had a choice. As if this was anything but exactly what it was. Ownership, purchased, and paid for. But something in his tone, in the way he'd already dismissed the entire transaction, made her feet move before her brain caught up. She stepped down from the crate. Her legs nearly buckled. She'd been standing there for over an hour before the auction even started, but she locked her knees and forced herself forward. The crowd parted wordlessly. She could feel their eyes on her, feel their judgment and curiosity and disappointed desire. The stranger was already outside. Lila emerged into the glaring sunlight, momentarily blinded. When her vision adjusted, she saw him standing beside a horse, a large roan mare with intelligent eyes, checking the saddle cinch. What's your name? He asked without looking at her. Lila opened her mouth, closed it. She hadn't spoken in 3 weeks. Wasn't sure she could. Never mind. He finished with the cinch and moved to a pack horse tied nearby. You can tell me if you want to, or not. Makes no difference to me. The casualness of it felt like a trap. Lila had learned that kindness was often just cruelty wearing a patient mask. She stood motionless, waiting for instructions, for demands, for the moment when his facade would crack and reveal what he really wanted. The stranger pulled a canteen from his pack and turned to face her directly for the first time. Up close, she could see the fine lines around his eyes, the scar cutting through his left eyebrow, the exhaustion that seemed to live in his bones. He looked like a man who had seen too much and stopped being surprised by any of it. He held out the canteen. You're probably thirsty. Lila stared at the offering. Definitely a trap. Men didn't give things without expecting something in return. That was the fundamental equation she'd learned. Everything had a price, and the price was always higher than they told you. It's just water, he said, as if reading her thoughts. I haven't poisoned it, if that's what you're worried about. She wasn't worried about poison. She was worried about debt, about owing, about the moment when he'd collect payment for even this small kindness. but her throat was dust dry, her lips cracked. She'd had nothing to drink since early morning. Slowly, she reached for the canteen. Her fingers brushed his as she took it, and she flinched despite herself. He noticed, of course he noticed, but he didn't comment. Just stepped back and returned to checking his supplies. Lila lifted the canteen to her lips. The water was warm and slightly metallic, but it was the most delicious thing she'd tasted in days. She forced herself to drink slowly, to not gulp it down like the desperate creature she was. That's far enough. A new voice. Lila's hand froze, water dribbling down her chin. 3 men had followed them out of the barn. Tobacco Beard and 2 others who looked like they'd stepped out of the same mold. Rough clothes, rougher faces, the kind of men who believed might made right. The stranger didn't turn around. "You need something, Gibbs?" So Tobacco Beard had a name. Gibbs stepped closer, his 2 companions flanking him. "That girl should have been mine. You cheated somehow." "I paid what Crow asked for, more than you could scrape together, apparently." 3 coins is an insult. She's worth more than that." "Then why didn't you pay more?" The stranger's voice remained mild, but Lila saw his hand drift to his hip, where a gun belt rode low. "You had your chance. You chose to gamble that nobody else would bid. You lost." "I'm not done." "Yes," the stranger said, and now his voice changed, went cold and flat. "You are." The transformation was instant. One moment he'd been relaxed, almost bored. The next, he radiated a lethal stillness that made Lila's breath catch. He still hadn't turned around, hadn't even looked at Gibbs directly. But somehow his entire presence had shifted into something that made the 3 men hesitate. "Walk away," the stranger said quietly. "Right now. Because if you make me turn around, if you make this into something it doesn't need to be, you won't like how it ends." Lila could see Gibbs calculating, weighing his pride against his survival instinct. The moment stretched. Then Gibbs spat in the dirt and jerked his head at his companions. "This ain't over." "It is," the stranger said. "You just don't know it yet." The 3 men retreated, throwing dark looks over their shoulders. Lila realized she'd been holding her breath. She let it out slowly, her heart hammering against her ribs. The stranger went back to his supplies as if nothing had happened. "You done with that water?" Lila lowered the canteen with trembling hands. She should give it back, should say thank you, should say something. But her voice was locked away, trapped behind 3 weeks of silence and 19 years of learning that words were weapons that could be used against you. "Keep it," he said when she just stood there. "You'll need it for the ride." Ride. Right. He'd bought her. Now he was taking her. Where? To his ranch, probably. To whatever life he'd purchased her for. Cook, he'd said. Clean. Mend. And all the other things that men expected from women they owned. The things that didn't get spoken aloud in public. He swung up into the saddle with easy grace, then looked down at her. "You can ride?" Lila shook her head. She'd never been on a horse in her life. Something that might have been amusement flickered in his eyes. "Of course not." "All right, come here." This was it. The moment where he'd pull her up in front of him, where she'd feel his chest against her back, his arms around her, his breath on her neck, where the pretense of civility would end and the reality of ownership would begin. Lila's feet wouldn't move. She knew she was being stupid. Delay wouldn't change anything. Resistance would only make it worse. But her body had decided it was done obeying, done accepting, done surrendering. The stranger waited. When she still didn't move, he sighed and dismounted. "Look," he said, and his voice had lost its edge, gone patient in a way that made Lila's eyes burn with unexpected tears. "I know you've got every reason not to trust me. I know you think you know how this goes. But I'm asking you to walk maybe 10 feet and let me help you onto this horse, because my ranch is 4 hours away and you're barefoot and the sun is brutal today. Can you do that?" The kindness in his tone was worse than any cruelty could have been. Cruelty, she knew how to handle. Kindness felt like a hand reaching through the armor she'd built, threatening to crack it open and expose all the fear and pain she'd locked away. But he was right about one thing. She was barefoot, and 4 hours walking on this rocky ground would shred her feet to ribbons. Lila forced herself forward. 1 step, 2, 3. When she was close enough, the stranger held out his hand. "I'm going to lift you up," he said. I'm going to touch your waist, that's all. All right? The fact that he was asking, as if her permission mattered, as if she had any right to refuse, made something crack in Lila's chest. She managed a small nod. His hands were warm and rough with calluses when they gripped her waist. He lifted her easily, setting her on the saddle. Swing your leg over. She did awkwardly, gripping the saddle horn with white-knuckled hands. The horse shifted beneath her and Lila gasped, certain she was about to fall. But the stranger's hand steadied her calf, just briefly, just enough, then withdrew. Josie's gentle, he said, patting the horse's neck. She won't throw you unless you kick her, and I'm guessing you're not planning to kick her. Lila shook her head mutely. Good. He gathered the reins and handed them to her, then adjusted the stirrups for her shorter legs. Every movement was efficient, impersonal. Then he went to the pack horse, untied it, and began leading both animals away from the barn. Wait. Lila's mind struggled to process what was happening. He wasn't riding. He was walking, leading the horses, while she sat in the saddle. That couldn't be right. Masters didn't walk while their servants rode. That wasn't how the world worked. But apparently, it was how his world worked, because he just kept walking, not looking back to see if she was following. The horse moved forward naturally, following the pack horse, and Lila found herself carried along whether she wanted to be or not. They left the small frontier town behind, if you could even call it a town. It was more of a collection of buildings scattered around a main street, born from nothing and probably destined to return to nothing once the nearby silver mine played out. Lila had never learned its name, hadn't wanted to. It was just the place where she'd been sold for 3 pieces of silver. The sun beat down mercilessly as they headed into open country. The landscape was harsh and beautiful in equal measure. Rolling hills covered in dry grass, occasional stands of cottonwood trees, distant mountains purple with haze. The sky was so blue it hurt to look at, and so vast that Lila felt like an insect that might be crushed by all that emptiness. The stranger, she still didn't know his name, maintained a steady pace, never looking back. He moved like a man used to long distances, his gait eating up the miles without apparent effort. Lila clung to the saddle horn, trying to find a rhythm with the horse's movement, trying not to think about what waited at the end of this journey. An hour passed. Then another. The sun crept lower, throwing long shadows across the ground. Lila's backside ached from the unfamiliar position, and despite the water she'd drunk, her throat was parched again. But she didn't say anything. Didn't ask to stop, didn't complain. She'd learned long ago that complaints were just invitations for punishment. Finally, as they topped a low rise, the stranger stopped. Lila looked past him and saw a homestead nestled in a shallow valley, a log cabin, a barn, a small corral, all surrounded by grassland that stretched to the horizon. Home, the stranger said simply. He glanced back at her for the first time since they'd left town. You still doing all right up there? Lila nodded, though all right was a generous description. She was exhausted, frightened, and had no idea what came next. But she was still conscious and still in the saddle, so by some definitions, she supposed that qualified as all right. They descended the rise and approached the cabin. It was larger than Lila had expected, well-maintained, with a covered porch and glass windows, luxuries on the frontier. Behind it, the barn looked sturdy, and the corral fence was intact. Whatever else he was, the stranger clearly wasn't destitute. He stopped in front of the cabin and tied the pack horse to a hitching post, then came to stand beside Lila's horse. All right, come on down. Lila tried to swing her leg over, but her muscles had stiffened during the ride. She managed to get her leg across, but then just sat there, unsure how to dismount without falling. I'm going to help, the stranger said, and again with that warning, that request for permission. Hands on my shoulders. Lila hesitated, then placed her palms on his shoulders. His muscles were solid beneath her touch, warm from the sun and the long walk. He gripped her waist, this time less briefly, and lifted her down. Her legs buckled the moment her feet touched the ground, and if he hadn't kept his grip, she would have fallen. Steady, he murmured. Give it a second. Lila stood there, supported by a stranger's hands, feeling the strength return to her legs. This close, she could smell him, leather and horse and clean sweat, not unpleasant. Could see the individual dark hairs of his stubble, the exact gray of his eyes. Could feel his breath moving, steady and patient. "Better?" he asked. She nodded. He released her immediately and stepped back. Then, unexpectedly, he knelt. Lila jerked backward, her heart slamming into her throat. Men kneeling meant one thing: violence, punishment, humiliation. She'd seen it at the foundling home, seen what happened when men knelt to teach lessons to girls who'd forgotten their place. "Easy," the stranger said, and his voice was soft, non-threatening. "I'm just... hold still a second." His hands moved to her left foot so gently that Lila barely felt the touch at first. Then she realized what he was doing. He was examining her feet, which were cut and bleeding from her hours standing on the wooden crate, embedded with splinters and dust. "Damn," he muttered. "You should have said something." Lila couldn't find words to explain that she hadn't said anything because saying things never helped, only made them worse. That she'd learned to endure pain silently because screaming just entertained the people causing it. The stranger stood and moved to his saddlebag, returning with a cloth and a small bottle. "This is going to sting," he warned, then poured clear liquid, whiskey from the smell, onto the cloth. He knelt again and began cleaning her feet with surprising gentleness, picking out splinters, wiping away blood. It did sting. Lila bit her lip to stay silent, but a small sound escaped anyway. Not quite a whimper, but close. "Almost done," he said quietly. "You're tougher than you look, you know that?" Lila didn't feel tough. She felt like she was made of glass, held together by hope and terror in equal measure, one sharp impact away from shattering completely. He finished with her feet and stood again, studying her. Then he did something that would replay in Lila's mind 1,000 times in the weeks to come. He shrugged off his coat, a worn leather duster, dusty from travel, and draped it around her shoulders. The weight of it was immediately comforting, the lingering warmth from his body seeping into her cold skin. Lila pulled it closer instinctively, then froze, waiting for him to tell her the cost of this kindness, to explain what she now owed. "You're shivering," he said, by way of explanation. "Sun's going down. Gets cold fast out here." Then he turned and headed for the cabin door, as if covering a stranger in his coat was the most natural thing in the world. Lila stood there, wrapped in leather that smelled like him, her feet throbbing but clean, her mind struggling to reconcile everything that had happened in the past 4 hours. He'd bought her for almost nothing. He'd defended her from Gibbs without being asked. He'd walked for hours while she rode. He'd tended her wounds with his own hands. He'd knelt before her. Men didn't kneel before women they owned. They didn't ask permission. They didn't treat purchases like people. The stranger pushed open the cabin door and looked back, as if surprised she hadn't followed. "You coming? I've got stew from last night that'll warm up all right, and you look like you haven't eaten in a week." It had been 3 days, actually, but who was counting? Lila took a step forward, then another. Then she stopped, because she had to know, had to hear him say it, so there wouldn't be any confusion later when reality set in. "What?" Her voice cracked from disuse, barely more than a whisper. "What do you want from me?" The stranger tilted his head slightly, considering the question. When he answered, his voice was matter-of-fact, without any hidden meanings she could detect. "Tonight, I want you to eat something, rest, and not bleed on my clean floor. Tomorrow?" He shrugged. "We'll figure it out." "But you paid for—" "I paid 3 coins to get you out of that barn before Gibbs bought you." His gray eyes met hers steadily. "What I want and what you're obligated to give me are 2 different things. Do you understand the distinction?" Lila didn't. Not really. In her experience, there was no distinction. What men wanted, they took, and obligations were just another word for powerlessness. The stranger seemed to read the confusion on her face. He sighed, scrubbed a hand over his jaw. "Look, I'm going to say this once, clearly, so there's no misunderstanding. You don't belong to me. I don't own you. That auction back there, that was legal theater, nothing more. As far as I'm concerned, you're a person who had a bad piece of luck and needed help. That's it." The words didn't make sense. They were in English, and Lila understood each one individually, but strung together they formed an impossible sentence. "Why?" she managed. "Why what? Why would you pay for me if you don't want— if you're not going to— force you to repay me with your body?" He said it bluntly, without embarrassment. "Because I'm not a man who needs to buy compliance. Because I've got two hands that work fine for cooking and cleaning, and because he paused, something flashing across his face too quickly for Lila to identify. Because once, a long time ago, someone helped me when I needed it, and I figured it was past time I paid that forward. Lila stood there in his coat, her feet hurting, her mind reeling, trying to decide if this was an elaborate lie or if she'd somehow stumbled into the one decent man in 1,000 miles of frontier brutality. "You still haven't told me your name," the stranger added. "I'm Ethan, by the way. Ethan Hale. This," he gestured at the cabin, the land around them, "is my place. Has been for about 5 years now." "Lila," she whispered. "Lila Monroe." "Lila." He tested the name, nodded. "All right, Lila Monroe. Let's get you inside and fed. Everything else can wait until you've got a full stomach and a good night's sleep." He disappeared into the cabin. Lila stood in the growing darkness, wrapped in Ethan Hale's coat, trying to understand what had just happened to her life. She had been sold for 3 silver coins. She had been kneeled before. She had been told she didn't belong to the man who'd bought her. And now she was being invited, not ordered invited, to eat dinner. Lila Monroe, who had learned to expect nothing but cruelty from the world, who had spent 3 weeks in silence preparing herself for the worst, who had watched the sunrise that morning, certain that this would be the day her life ended in all the ways that mattered. Lila Monroe took a breath, pulled the coat tighter around her shoulders, and walked through the door. The interior of Ethan Hale's cabin was nothing like what Lila had expected. Clean, for one thing. Genuinely clean. Not the half-hearted swipe of a rag that most bachelor establishments received. The wooden floor was swept. The windows let in the last rays of sunlight without a film of grime obscuring them, and the air smelled of wood smoke and something herbal she couldn't quite identify. The main room served as kitchen, dining area, and sitting room all at once. A stone fireplace dominated one wall, its mantel bare except for a single tin cup and what looked like a very old photograph in a simple frame. A rough-hewn table with 2 chairs sat near the kitchen area, where shelves held an orderly collection of tin plates, cups, and cooking implements. In the corner, a rocking chair faced the fireplace, a quilt folded neatly over its back. 2 doors led off the main room. Bedrooms, Lila assumed, though both were closed. Ethan was already at the stove, stirring something in a large pot. The smell hit Lila a moment later, meat, vegetables, something rich and savory that made her stomach clench with sudden, desperate hunger. She couldn't remember the last time she'd smelled real food, the kind that was cooked with care instead of boiled into flavorless submission. "Sit," Ethan said, nodding toward the table. It wasn't an order exactly, more of an observation about what made sense. "This'll be ready in a minute." Lila moved to the table but didn't sit. Old habits died hard. She'd learned at the foundling home that sitting before being explicitly told to could earn you a backhand across the face. Better to stand and wait for absolute clarity. Ethan glanced over his shoulder and frowned slightly. "Something wrong with the chair?" Lila's voice stuck. "You said to sit." "Right. So why are you standing there looking like you're waiting for the gallows?" "Because I don't know the rules yet," Lila wanted to say. "Because every place has different rules, and the punishment for breaking them is always worse than you expect. Because sitting without permission got Mary Schaffer locked in the basement for 2 days at the foundling home, and she came back different, broken in ways that didn't heal. But she couldn't say any of that, so she just stood there, mute and useless." Ethan studied her for a long moment, then seemed to understand something. His expression softened. "Lila, when I say sit, I mean sit. I'm not testing you. I'm not waiting for you to make a mistake so I can punish you for it. I'm just a man who's been walking for 4 hours and figures you've been riding for 4 hours, and both of us could probably use a chair, that's all." The reasonableness of it was almost cruel. Lila wanted rules she could follow, clear boundaries she could navigate. This open-ended kindness felt like walking through fog, no way to know what was solid ground and what was a cliff edge. But she sat, pulled out the chair, which scraped against the floor with a sound that made her wince, and lowered herself onto it. The wood was smooth, worn by years of use, and the height was perfect. She could rest her aching feet flat on the floor, could let her spine relax just slightly. "Better?" Ethan asked. Lila nodded, though better was relative. She was sitting in a stranger's house, wearing his coat, about to eat his food, with no clear understanding of what any of it would cost her. Ethan ladled stew into 2 bowls, carried them to the table, then returned for spoons and a half loaf of bread that he tore into chunks. He set 1 bowl in front of Lila, kept the other for himself, and sat down across from her without ceremony. "Go ahead," he said, breaking off a piece of bread and using it to sop up some of the broth. "It's better while it's hot." Lila stared at the bowl. Carrots, potatoes, chunks of beef, all swimming in rich brown gravy. More food in this single bowl than she'd had in the past week. Her hands trembled as she picked up the spoon. The first bite was a revelation. Flavor, actual flavor, salt and pepper and something else, maybe thyme, flooded her mouth. The beef was tender, the vegetables cooked through but not mushy. It was the kind of meal that someone had taken time with, had cared about. She took another bite. Then another. Then she forced herself to slow down, to eat like a person instead of a starving animal, because she'd learned that showing too much desperation only invited mockery, or worse. Ethan ate steadily, not watching her but not pointedly ignoring her either. Just eating his own dinner like this was a normal evening, like he regularly brought home girls he'd bought at auction and fed them his stew. "You can eat faster if you want," he said after a minute. "You're not going to offend me, and there's more in the pot if you finish that." Lila's spoon paused halfway to her mouth. "More?" "Made it yesterday. Figured I'd be eating leftovers for days. Might as well share it with someone who actually needs it." He sopped up more gravy with his bread, chewed thoughtfully. "When's the last time you ate?" 3 days, Lila said, then immediately wished she'd lied. Admitting weakness was dangerous. People used weakness against you. But Ethan just nodded like she'd confirmed something he'd already suspected. "And before that?" "They fed us at the foundling home before they sent us away." Lila's voice was barely above a whisper. "Breakfast, mostly. Porridge." "Nothing on the trip here?" Crow said food cost extra. Ethan's jaw tightened, the first sign of anger she'd seen from him. "Crow's a bastard. Sorry, I shouldn't curse, but he is." "You don't need to apologize," Lila said, surprising herself. "I've heard worse." "I imagine you have." Ethan pushed the bread plate toward her. "Eat as much as you want. I meant what I said. There's plenty." So Lila ate. She ate until the bowl was empty and her stomach felt uncomfortably full, stretched beyond what it had grown accustomed to. Ethan watched her finish, then stood and ladled more stew into her bowl without asking. "I can't," Lila started. "You can. Maybe not right now, but in an hour or so you'll be hungry again. That's how it works when you've been starving. Your body doesn't trust that food will keep coming, so it wants to eat everything immediately. Better to have it waiting than have you lying awake with your stomach cramping." He said it like he knew, like he'd been there himself. Lila wanted to ask, but didn't dare. They finished the meal in silence. Lila managed another few bites of the second bowl before her body absolutely refused more. Ethan cleared the dishes without comment, pumping water into a basin and washing them efficiently. Lila watched, trying to figure out her place in this strange household. Should she offer to help? Take over the washing? Was he testing her domestic skills? "I can do that," she said finally. Ethan glanced back. "Do what?" "The washing, the cleaning. I know how." "I don't doubt it." He set a clean bowl on the drying rack. "But you've had a long day, and those feet need proper tending before infection sets in. Dishes can wait, or I can do them. I've been doing them for 5 years. One more night won't kill me." "But you paid for—" "Lila." He turned to face her, his hands dripping soapy water. "I know what you're thinking. You're thinking that there's got to be a ledger somewhere, a running total of what you owe me. 3 coins plus dinner plus a place to sleep equals some amount of labor or something else. That's how it's worked everywhere you've been, right? Everything has a price and you're always the one paying." Lila couldn't speak past the tightness in her throat. He'd articulated her exact thoughts with unnerving accuracy. "Well, that's not how it works here," Ethan continued. "I fed you because you were hungry. I'll give you a place to sleep because you need one. Tomorrow, if you want to help around the place, fine. If you want to rest, also fine. If you want to leave, walk out that door and I won't stop you. There's no ledger, Lila. There's no debt. That's not... People don't just... She struggled to find words. Why? Why what? Why would you help someone without expecting anything back? That's not how the world works. Ethan dried his hands on a rag, considering her question. Maybe it's not how your world has worked, but it's how my world works, and right now you're in my world. So you get to decide if you want to accept that or keep waiting for the other shoe to drop. He crossed to one of the closed doors and opened it, revealing a small bedroom. A narrow bed with a real mattress, a wooden chest, a window with actual curtains. Nothing fancy, but clean and private and more luxury than Lila had known in years. This was... Ethan paused, something passing across his face. This is the spare room. You can sleep here. Door has a lock on the inside, see? He demonstrated, showing her the simple bolt lock. I'm in the other room. I sleep heavy, and the walls are thick, so you don't need to worry about disturbing me or anything else. Lila understood what he wasn't saying. The walls were thick enough that if she screamed, he wouldn't hear, but also the walls were thick enough that she could lock herself in without fearing he'd break through. There's a nightshirt in the chest, Ethan added. Clean. Probably too big for you, but it'll do until we can get you proper clothes. And I'll bring some water and clean rags so you can wash up if you want. He left, giving her space to process. Lila stepped into the room slowly, half expecting it to vanish like a mirage. But it remained solid. The bed was real. The mattress yielded when she pressed her hand against it. The curtains moved in the slight breeze from the cracked window. A room. A private room with a door that locked. For her. Ethan returned with a basin of warm water, clean rags, and a small jar. This is salve, he said, setting everything on the chest. For your feet. Should help with the cuts and keep infection out. You know how to dress a wound? Lila nodded. She'd learned at the foundling home, where injuries were common and sympathy was not. Good. If you need anything, and I mean anything, I'm right through that wall. He pointed to the wall the room shared with presumably his bedroom. Just knock. I meant what I said about sleeping heavy, but if you knock hard enough, I'll hear it. He moved to leave, then paused in the doorway. Lila, I want to say something, and I need you to really hear it. You're safe here. I know you don't believe that yet, and I know I can't convince you just by saying it, but it's true. You're safe. Whatever happened to you before, whatever you're afraid might happen now, it won't. Not here, not while I'm breathing. Before Lila could respond, he pulled the door closed behind him. She heard his footsteps retreat, heard the other bedroom door open and close. Then silence. Lila stood frozen in the center of the small room. She waited for the door to open again, for Ethan to come back with the real demands, the actual cost of his generosity. She waited for 10 minutes, 20, half an hour. The door didn't open. Finally, moving like someone in a dream, Lila walked to the door and slid the bolt lock home. The metal clicking into place was the most beautiful sound she'd ever heard. She peeled off Ethan's coat, reluctantly, because it had become a kind of armor, and hung it on the peg beside the door. Then she opened the chest and found the nightshirt, just as he'd promised. It was clean and worn soft from many washings, smelling faintly of soap and sunshine. Lila undressed slowly, folding the filthy dress she'd been wearing for 3 weeks into a small square. She should probably burn it, she thought distantly. Burn it and everything it represented. The foundling home, the auction, the feeling of being looked at like livestock. She used the warm water and rags to wash, wincing as she scrubbed away days of grime and fear sweat. The water in the basin turned gray, then brown. When she was as clean as she could manage, she applied the salve to her feet like Ethan had instructed. It stung at first, then went cool and soothing. The nightshirt did swallow her. It hung to her knees and the sleeves went past her hands. But it was clean and soft, and when she pulled it on, she felt almost human again. Almost. Lila approached the bed like it might bite her. She'd slept on mattresses before, but never one this nice, never one in a private room with a locked door. She sat on the edge first, testing it. The mattress compressed under her weight, cradling her aching body. She could lie down, she realized, could actually stretch out instead of curling into a protective ball in whatever corner seemed safest. She lay back, and the exhaustion she'd been fighting for weeks crashed over her like a wave. Her eyes burned with tears she'd been too afraid to shed earlier. She was safe, Ethan had said. She was safe. Lila wanted to believe him, wanted it so desperately that the wanting itself felt dangerous, like setting herself up for the worst betrayal yet. But the door was locked. The room was warm. Her stomach was full. And for tonight, just for tonight, maybe she could let herself pretend that safety was possible. She closed her eyes. Sleep came fast, but not peacefully. She dreamed of the auction barn, of Gibbs's yellowed teeth, of hands reaching for her that she couldn't escape. She dreamed of the foundling home, of the basement rooms, of screaming that no one heard. She dreamed of her mother, or the faint memory of her mother, because Lila had been only 5 when fever took her, singing a lullaby that Lila could no longer remember the words to. She woke gasping, disoriented, her heart racing. Moonlight streamed through the window, painting the unfamiliar room in silver and shadow. For a moment she couldn't remember where she was, only that she was trapped, that danger was coming, that she needed to run. Then her eyes adjusted and she saw the locked door, the chest, Ethan's coat hanging on the peg. Memory returned, though it felt unreal. Had she really been bought today? Had a stranger really brought her here and asked for nothing? Lila sat up, pressing her palms against her eyes. Her mouth was dry and her head ached, probably from crying in her sleep, though she didn't remember doing it. She needed water. She slipped out of bed, her feet protesting the movement despite the salve. She unlocked the door as quietly as possible and eased it open. The main room was dark except for the dying embers in the fireplace. She could make out the shape of the table, the chairs, the shelves. The water pump was in the kitchen area. Lila crept toward it, trying not to make noise, trying not to wake Ethan, but the floorboards betrayed her, creaking under her weight. "Can't sleep?" Lila nearly jumped out of her skin. Ethan's voice came from the rocking chair by the fireplace. As her eyes adjusted, she could make out his silhouette. He was sitting there fully dressed, though his boots were off. "I'm sorry," Lila whispered. "I didn't mean to wake you." "Didn't. I wasn't sleeping." He stood, and Lila instinctively took a step back, but he just moved to the table and struck a match, lighting an oil lamp. Warm light flooded the room. "You need water?" "I didn't mean to disturb—" "Lila, it's fine. You're allowed to need water." He filled a cup from the pump and brought it to her. "Bad dreams?" She nodded, accepting the cup and drinking deeply. The water was cool and clean, nothing like the tepid, slightly brackish stuff at the foundling home. "Not surprising," Ethan said. "You've been through hell. Dreams are how your mind tries to make sense of it. They'll get better eventually." "Do you—" Lila stopped, but Ethan gestured for her to continue. "Do you have bad dreams? Is that why you weren't sleeping?" Something flickered in his expression. Recognition, maybe, or shared understanding. "Sometimes. Had a few years of bad dreams after I came back from the war. They fade, mostly, but every now and then—" War. That explained some things. The way he moved, the controlled violence she'd sensed in his confrontation with Gibbs, the casual competence with which he navigated the world. He was a soldier. Or had been. "Which war?" Lila asked, then immediately regretted the question. It was too personal, too presumptuous, but Ethan didn't seem to mind. "The war between the states. I was with the Union Army, joined up when I was 16 because I was an idiot kid who thought war was adventure. Learned different pretty quick." "How long?" 4 years, Gettysburg, Antietam, Atlanta. Saw more death than any person should have to see in 10 lifetimes. He paused, staring at something Lila couldn't see. "Lost a lot of good men. Lost a lot." The pain in his voice was so raw that Lila wanted to reach out, to offer comfort the way he'd offered it to her. But she didn't know how, didn't know if it would be welcome. "Is that why you helped me?" she asked instead. "Because of the war?" "Partly." Ethan moved to the fireplace, adding a log to the dying embers. The wood caught quickly, sending up sparks. "During the war, I saw what happens when people are treated like they're less than human. Saw what men are capable of when they stop seeing others as worthy of basic dignity. And after the war, when I was trying to figure out who I was if I wasn't a soldier anymore, someone gave me a chance I didn't deserve. Helped me when they had no reason to. So when I saw you standing on that platform today, looking like you'd already given up on the world," he shrugged. Figured I'd give you the same chance someone gave me. What happened to them? The person who helped you? Ethan's expression closed off, became unreadable. She died 5 years ago. Cholera outbreak that swept through Denver. Lila filed that away, understanding now why there was a spare bedroom, why the cabin felt like a place where a woman had once lived, why Ethan knew how to cook and clean and tend wounds with gentle hands. I'm sorry, Lila said softly. Me too. Ethan turned from the fire, his face half-shadowed. Her name was Margaret. We weren't married, though we probably would have been if she'd lived. She was the one who taught me that kindness isn't weakness, that helping someone doesn't make you a fool, that sometimes the strongest thing you can do is put someone else's needs ahead of your own. The silence stretched between them, not uncomfortable, but weighted with shared grief. Lila grieved for people she'd never known, for the girl she might have been if the world had been kinder. Ethan grieved for a woman named Margaret who taught him how to be human again. You should try to sleep more, Ethan said finally. Tomorrow's going to be a long day. Alarm spiked through Lila. Why? What happens tomorrow? Nothing bad, just life. Chores. Maybe we'll go check the fence line, see how the cattle are doing. Normal things. He must have seen the fear on her face because he added, Lila, when I say long day, I mean long in the sense of there being things to do, not long in the sense of anything terrible. You're going to have to start trusting that I mean what I say. I'm trying, Lila whispered. I just don't know how. I know. But here's the thing about trust. It's built in small pieces. You don't have to trust me completely right now. You just have to trust me enough to go back to bed and lock your door and believe that when you wake up, you'll still be safe. Can you do that? Could she? Lila wasn't sure, but Ethan was looking at her with such patient understanding, waiting for her to find her own answer rather than telling her what it should be, that she found herself nodding. Good. Go on then. I'll be out here a while longer, so if you need anything, just call. Lila returned to the small bedroom, locked the door again, and climbed back into bed. This time, with her thirst quenched and Ethan's quiet presence just beyond the wall, sleep came more easily. And when the bad dreams tried to surface, she pushed them back with the memory of a man kneeling before her, not to hurt but to help, not to take but to give. Morning came with sunlight streaming through the curtains and the smell of coffee. Lila woke slowly, disoriented again by the unfamiliar comfort of a real bed. For a moment she thought she was back at the foundling home, that the previous day had been a dream. Then she saw Ethan's coat on the peg and remembered. She'd been sold. She'd been saved. She was in a stranger's cabin, in a stranger's nightshirt, with no clear idea of what came next, but with the strange, fragile sense that maybe, it wouldn't be the disaster she'd been expecting. She dressed in the filthy dress from yesterday because it was all she had, then steeled herself and opened the door. Ethan was at the stove again, this time frying eggs and bacon. The domestic normalcy of it was jarring. Morning, he said without turning around. Coffee's on the table, cups in the cupboard. Lila poured herself coffee, cradling the warm cup in both hands. She'd had coffee maybe a dozen times in her life. It was expensive and the foundling home considered it an unnecessary luxury. This coffee was strong and slightly bitter, but after she added cream from the pitcher on the table, it became something rich and fortifying. Ethan brought breakfast to the table, eggs, bacon, toast with butter. Another meal that was better than anything Lila had eaten in recent memory. They ate in companionable silence, and Lila found herself relaxing incrementally. If Ethan was planning to reveal himself as a monster, he was taking his sweet time about it. So, Ethan said, pushing his empty plate aside, we should talk about what happens next. There it was. Lila's stomach clenched despite the good breakfast. Here came the demands, the expectations, the real cost of his charity. You need clothes, Ethan continued. Real clothes, not that. He gestured at her dress. Whatever that thing used to be before Crow got his hands on you. There's a trading post about an hour's ride from here. We can go there, get you outfitted proper. I don't have any money, Lila said quietly. Didn't ask if you did. But, Lila, Ethan's voice was patient but firm. Do you need clothes? Yes. Do I have money to buy clothes? I suppose. Then we're going to get you clothes. That's not charity, that's just practical. Can't have you walking around in rags. He stood, started clearing dishes. While we're there, we'll pick up some other supplies. Maybe talk to some people. See if there's work around that might suit you if you decide you want work. Work? You said you know how to cook and clean and mend. There's always folks looking for help with that kind of thing. If you want to earn your own money, have your own independence, I can help you find opportunities. Or if you'd rather stay here and help around the ranch for a while until you figure out what you want, that's fine too. Lila struggled to process what he was saying. He was offering her choices. Actual choices, not the illusion of choice that was really just a test to see if you'd pick the right answer. What do you want me to do? She asked. Ethan paused in his dishwashing and looked at her. Doesn't matter what I want. What do you want to do? I don't know, Lila admitted. Nobody's ever asked me that before. Well, that's a shame, but we can fix it. You've got time to figure it out. No rush. In the meantime, we get you some clothes so you don't have to wear mine. He smiled slightly, though I'll admit the nightshirt looked less ridiculous on you than it does on me. The casual humor caught Lila off guard. She almost smiled back, stopped herself just in time. Smiling felt dangerous, like showing vulnerability that could be exploited. An hour later, they were on the trail again. This time, Ethan had saddled a different horse, a smaller mare named Bess, for Lila to ride. He rode alongside her on the roan, Josie, maintaining an easy pace that let them talk. How long have you had the ranch? Lila asked, surprising herself with the question. 5 years, like I said. Bought it with my army pay and what Margaret left me. Started with nothing but the cabin and 20 head of cattle. Built it up slow, steady. Got about 100 head now, some horses, chickens. It's not a grand operation, but it's mine. Do you run it alone? Mostly. Sometimes I hire help during roundup or when I need to move the herd, but day to day it's just me. I like it that way. Peaceful. Peaceful. Lila tried to imagine what that would feel like. To wake up each day knowing you were safe, that you controlled your own life, that peace was possible. It seemed like a fantasy, something from a storybook that had nothing to do with real life. But maybe, a small voice whispered in her mind, maybe it could be real. Maybe Ethan's strange kindness wasn't an elaborate trap, but simply who he was, a man who'd seen too much darkness and decided to create light wherever he could. The trading post turned out to be a larger establishment than Lila expected, serving the scattered ranches and homesteads in the area. Inside, shelves groaned under the weight of goods, fabric, tools, food stores, everything a frontier household might need. The proprietor, a weathered woman named Ruth, greeted Ethan warmly. Haven't seen you in a month, Hale. Thought maybe you'd finally starve to death out there. Not yet, Ruth. Too stubborn to die. Ethan gestured to Lila. This is Lila Monroe. She needs clothes. Everything. Work clothes, night clothes, boots, the whole outfit. Ruth's shrewd eyes assessed Lila in one sweeping glance, taking in the ill-fitting dress, the bruises that were just beginning to fade, the way Lila held herself like she expected to be struck. Her expression softened. Come with me, honey, Ruth said, her voice gentle. Let's see what we can find. What followed was the strangest hour of Lila's life. Ruth pulled out fabric and ready-made garments, measuring Lila with quick efficiency, asking questions about preferences that Lila had no idea how to answer because nobody had ever cared about her preferences before. Ethan stayed in the main part of the store, giving them privacy, occasionally calling out suggestions that Ruth either accepted or dismissed with cheerful authority. He's one of the good ones, Ruth said quietly, as she pinned a skirt to fit Lila's waist. Ethan, I mean. Known him since he came out here after the war. Lost as a man could be back then, but Margaret helped him find his way. After she passed, figured he'd give up and drift away. But he didn't. Stayed, worked hard, made himself into someone she'd be proud of. Did you know her? Margaret? Oh, yes. She was special, that one. Had a way of seeing the best in people, even when they couldn't see it themselves. Looks like Ethan learned that from her. Ruth met Lila's eyes in the mirror. I don't know your story, honey, and I won't pry. But whatever brought you to Ethan's door, I hope you'll give him a chance. He's not like other men out here. He's something better. By the time they finished, Lila had 2 work dresses, a nicer dress for occasions that required it, a nightgown, undergarments, a coat, and sturdy boots. More clothes than she'd owned in her entire life. Ethan paid without question or complaint, then added supplies for the ranch without asking if Ruth thought he needed them. As they loaded the packages onto the pack horse, Ruth pulled Lila aside one more time. "You ever need anything, and I mean anything, you come see me. Ethan's good people, but sometimes a girl needs another woman to talk to. Remember that." Lila nodded, overwhelmed by the cascade of kindness from people who had no reason to care whether she lived or died. The ride back to the ranch was quiet. Lila wore her new clothes, one of the work dresses and the boots, and marveled at how different it felt to wear something that actually fit, that was clean and whole. She felt almost like a person instead of a ghost. "Thank you," she said as they approached the cabin. Ethan glanced over. "For what?" "The clothes, the food, not—" She struggled to articulate it. "Not being what I expected." "You expected a monster," Ethan said matter-of-factly. "Can't blame you for that. World's full of them. But Lila, I need you to understand something. You don't owe me thanks for treating you like a human being. That's baseline. That's the bare minimum any decent person should do. If anything, you should be angry that you've been treated so badly for so long that basic decency feels like a miracle." The words hit Lila like a physical blow. He was right. She'd been so busy being grateful for not being hurt that she'd never stopped to be angry about being hurt in the first place. And suddenly, unexpectedly, she was angry. Angry at the foundling home for treating children like burdens. Angry at Crow for selling human beings. Angry at Gibbs and all the men like him who looked at women and saw only things to possess. Angry at a world that had taught her that survival meant silence and submission. The anger felt good, felt powerful, felt like the first real emotion she'd let herself feel in years. "That's it," Ethan said, and when Lila looked at him, he was almost smiling. "There you go. Hold on to that. You're going to need it." "Need what?" "The anger, the fire. Because here's what happens next, Lila Monroe. You're going to heal. You're going to rest and eat and remember what it feels like to be safe. And then you're going to decide who you want to be. Not who the world told you to be, not who anyone else needs you to be, who you want to be. And that decision is going to require some fire." They reached the cabin as the sun began its descent toward the horizon. Ethan helped her down from the horse, and for the first time, Lila didn't flinch at his touch. Didn't brace for violence that didn't come. "Small pieces," Ethan had said. Trust was built in small pieces. Maybe this was one of them. The days that followed developed a rhythm that Lila had never experienced before. Predictable without being oppressive, structured without being restrictive. She woke each morning to sunlight filtering through her curtains and the smell of coffee drifting from the main room. She dressed in her new clothes, still marveling at how different it felt to wear fabric that didn't chafe or hang in tatters. She emerged from her room to find breakfast waiting. Always something substantial. Always more than she thought she could eat. Ethan never demanded she eat with him, never commanded her presence. He simply set 2 places at the table and filled 2 plates, and if she chose to join him, he nodded his acknowledgement. If she chose to take her plate back to her room, which she did the first few days, he said nothing, just continued eating his own meal with the same calm patience he seemed to bring to everything. On the 4th morning, Lila sat at the table. Ethan glanced up from his eggs, something flickering in his eyes that might have been approval or simply recognition. "Sleep better last night?" She had actually. The nightmares were still there, still jolted her awake in the dark hours before dawn, but they were coming less frequently. And when she woke gasping, she could see the moonlight on her locked door and remember where she was. Safe. Or as close to safe as she'd ever been. "Yes," Lila said. The word felt strange in her mouth. How long had it been since she'd answered a question honestly instead of calculating what answer would cause the least harm? "Good." Ethan pushed the basket of biscuits toward her. "You'll need your strength today if you're planning to come out with me." Lila's hand paused, reaching for a biscuit. "Come out where?" "Got to check the fence line on the north pasture. One of the posts is loose and the cattle have been testing it. Need to shore it up before they decide to go exploring." He sipped his coffee, watching her over the rim. "Could use an extra pair of hands, but only if you're interested. If you'd rather stay here, that's fine too. There it was again. A choice. A genuine choice, not a test disguised as one. Lila could feel herself standing at a crossroads. She could stay in the cabin, stay safe within these four walls where nothing was demanded of her. Or she could step outside, into Ethan's world, and risk discovering whether his kindness extended beyond the threshold of his home. "I'll come," she heard herself say. Something in Ethan's expression shifted, became almost proud. "All right then. Finish eating and dress warm. Gets windy out in the open pasture." An hour later, Lila found herself riding Bess across rangeland that seemed to stretch forever. The sky was impossibly blue, the kind of blue that only existed in high country, and the wind Ethan had warned about whipped across the grassland in waves she could actually see. It was beautiful and harsh and alien, nothing like the crowded streets and cramped rooms that had defined her life until now. Ethan rode slightly ahead, sitting easy in the saddle, one hand resting on his thigh while the other held the reins loosely. He moved with his horse instead of against it, part of the animal's rhythm rather than trying to dominate it. Lila tried to imitate his posture, his relaxation, but she was too aware of every movement, too afraid of making a mistake. "You're thinking too hard," Ethan called back without turning around. "Horse can feel when you're tense, makes her nervous. Just breathe and let yourself move with her." Lila tried, took a breath, let her shoulders drop slightly, focused on the way Bess's gait created a rolling motion beneath her. And slowly, incrementally, she felt herself sync with the horse's movement. The ride became smoother, less jarring. "Better," Ethan said. "You're a quick learner." The compliment warmed something in Lila's chest that had been cold for so long she'd forgotten it existed. Pride, maybe. Or the simple pleasure of doing something well and having it acknowledged. They reached the north pasture fence after about 40 minutes of riding. Lila could see what Ethan meant about the loose post. It leaned at an angle, the wire fencing sagging where it pulled away. Several cattle grazed nearby, occasionally testing the weak spot with their massive heads. Ethan dismounted and began unloading tools from his saddlebag. "All right, here's what we're doing. I need to dig out around this post, set it deeper, pack it tight with rocks and soil, then restring the wire so it's taut again. Should take maybe 2 hours if the ground cooperates." "What do you need me to do?" Lila asked, sliding down from Bess with more confidence than she'd had a few days ago. "Can you hold the wire steady while I work? Keep tension on it so I can see where to secure it?" It was real work, Lila realized. Not make work designed to keep her busy or test her obedience, but actual necessary labor that required two people. He genuinely needed her help. "I can do that," she said. They worked in the kind of comfortable silence that Lila was learning characterized most of Ethan's interactions. He dug and pried and cursed when the shovel hit rock. She held the wire, adjusting her grip when he asked, stepping back when he needed space. The sun climbed higher, the wind picked up, and sweat dampened her dress despite the cool air. "You can take a break if you need to," Ethan said after the first hour, pausing to wipe his forehead with his sleeve. "I'm fine," Lila said, and realized it was true. Her hands ached from gripping the wire, her shoulders burned from holding them in position, but it was the good kind of ache, the kind that came from useful labor instead of pointless suffering. Ethan studied her for a moment, then nodded and went back to work. And in that nod, Lila felt something shift. He'd offered her an out and she'd declined it, and he'd accepted her choice without argument or suspicion. He trusted her to know her own limits. Trust went both ways, she was beginning to understand. He was asking her to trust him, yes, but he was also trusting her to be honest, to be capable, to be more than the broken thing he'd bought for 3 silver coins. By the time they finished, the sun had passed its zenith and begun its slow descent toward evening. The post stood straight and solid, the wire stretched taut, the fence once again capable of keeping the cattle where they belonged. Ethan tested it one final time, throwing his weight against it, and when it held firm, he allowed himself a small, satisfied smile. "Good work," he said, and Lila knew he meant both of them together. They ate lunch sitting on the grass beside the fence, bread and cheese and apples that Ethan had packed. The cattle had wandered closer, curious about the humans invading their territory, and Lila found herself watching them with fascination. She'd never been this close to cattle before. They were enormous and slightly ridiculous, with their big liquid eyes and the way they chewed continuously as if eating were their life's primary purpose. "You can pet one if you want," Ethan said, noticing her interest. "They're gentle, curious. Won't they hurt me?" "Not unless you spook them. Move slow, let them come to you, and they'll be fine." Lila stood slowly and walked toward the nearest cow, a large brown creature with white patches. The cow watched her approach with mild interest, still chewing. Lila extended her hand the way she'd seen Ethan do with the horses, palm flat, moving incrementally. The cow's nose was wet and soft when it snuffled against her palm. Its breath was warm and smelled like grass. Lila felt a startled laugh bubble up in her chest. When was the last time she'd laughed? She couldn't remember. "Her name's Bess," Ethan said, "like the mare. I'm not creative with names." "She's beautiful," Lila said, and meant it. The cow was beautiful in her simple existence, in the way she stood solid and uncomplicated, wanting nothing more than grass and sun and safety. They stayed there longer than necessary, Lila petting the cow while Ethan leaned against the fence and watched the horizon. Finally he stirred, gathering the remains of their lunch. "We should head back. Got chores to do before dark." The ride home was quieter than the ride out, but it was a different kind of quiet. Not the tense, waiting silence of those first days, but something almost companionable. Lila found herself relaxing into it, letting the rhythm of the horse and the warmth of the sun lull her into something close to peace. Back at the cabin, Ethan showed her the chicken coop tucked behind the barn. A dozen hens scratched and pecked in the enclosed run, presided over by a rooster who eyed them with deep suspicion. "Eggs need collecting twice a day," Ethan explained, demonstrating how to reach into the nesting boxes without startling the hens. "Morning and evening. Some of the hens are broody. They'll peck if you're not careful, but most of them are used to it." Lila watched him collect eggs with quick, practiced movements, transferring them to a basket lined with straw. When he handed her the basket, their fingers brushed, and this time Lila didn't flinch. Progress, she thought. Small pieces. "You try," Ethan said, stepping back. Lila approached the nearest nesting box cautiously. A plump red hen sat inside, regarding her with one beady eye. Lila reached in slowly, felt the warmth of the egg beneath the hen's body, and carefully extracted it. The hen made a disgruntled noise but didn't peck. "Good," Ethan said. "See? They're not so bad once you know what to expect." Over the next hour, Ethan showed her the rest of the daily chores. How to pump water for the horses, how much grain to give them, where the hay was stored, how to check the barn for needed repairs, how to secure the doors at night against predators. He explained everything clearly, demonstrated when necessary, then stepped back and let her try. Never once did he criticize. If she made a mistake, pumping the water too fast so it splashed everywhere, giving the horses too much grain, he simply showed her the correct method and let her try again. No impatience, no anger, just the steady calm that seemed to be his default state. "You're a good teacher," Lila said as they walked back to the cabin in the gathering dusk. Ethan looked surprised. "Never thought of myself that way. Margaret was the teacher. I just remember what she taught me and pass it along." "She taught you all this?" "This and more. Taught me that patience gets you further than force, that people and animals respond better to respect than fear. That work is easier when you understand why you're doing it, instead of just being told to do it." He held the cabin door open for her. She was a school teacher before the cholera, one of those people who could explain complicated things in ways that made sense. They entered the cabin, and Lila helped Ethan prepare dinner, venison stew this time, using meat from a deer he'd shot the previous week. He showed her how he seasoned it, how long to let it simmer, how to test if the vegetables were tender. She watched and learned and tried not to think about how surreal this was, standing in a kitchen with a man who'd bought her, learning to cook not because she was forced to, but because he was willing to teach. "Can I ask you something?" Lila said as they waited for the stew to finish. "Always. Why did you really buy me? You said it was because someone helped you once, but..." She struggled to articulate the question. There must have been other people who needed help, other ways to pay it forward. Why me? Why that day? Ethan was quiet for a long moment, staring into the pot of simmering stew. When he finally spoke, his voice was softer than usual. I was in town to sell some cattle. Wasn't planning to stay long, just conduct business and get home. But I heard there was an auction happening, and something made me curious, so I went to look. He stirred the stew absently. And I saw you standing up there, and I saw the way those men were looking at you, like you were nothing, like you were less than the livestock they'd buy at a regular auction. And I saw your face, the way you'd already accepted that this was your life, that there was no hope of anything better. He turned to face her, his gray eyes intense. I saw myself, Lila. Not now, but 20 years ago, when I was a kid who thought he had no choices, no future, nothing but whatever scraps the world decided to throw me. And I remembered what it felt like when Margaret looked at me and saw potential instead of trash, saw a person instead of a problem. He paused. So I figured maybe I could do the same for you. Give you a chance to discover that you're more than what the world told you. That's all. No grand plan, no ulterior motive, just one person helping another because they can. Lila felt tears prick her eyes. She blinked them back, not wanting to cry, not wanting to show that kind of vulnerability. But Ethan's honesty had cracked something open in her chest, and she wasn't sure she could keep it contained. What if I can't? She whispered. What if I'm too broken to be anything else? You're not broken, Ethan said firmly. You're hurt. There's a difference. Broken things can't be fixed. Hurt things can heal, given time and care and safety. And Lila, you're healing. I can see it. You rode out to the north pasture today and worked for 2 hours without complaint. You laughed when Bess, the cow, not the horse, sniffed your hand. You asked me a real question instead of just telling me what you think I want to hear. That's healing. Was it? Lila wanted desperately to believe him, but years of disappointment and betrayal had taught her to be skeptical of hope. How long did it take you? She asked. To heal from the war? I'm still healing, Ethan admitted. Probably will be for the rest of my life. But Margaret taught me that healing isn't about forgetting what hurt you. It's about learning to live with it without letting it control you. It's about deciding who you want to be despite what happened, not because of it. They ate dinner in thoughtful silence, both lost in their own memories and realizations. Afterward, Lila insisted on washing the dishes. Ethan looked like he might argue, then seemed to understand that she needed to contribute something, needed to feel useful rather than just a guest indefinitely imposing on his hospitality. All right, he said, but I'm drying. It'll go faster that way. So they stood side by side at the basin, Lila washing while Ethan dried, working in the easy rhythm of two people who were beginning to understand each other. And as she handed him a clean plate and their fingers brushed for the third or fourth time without her recoiling, Lila realized something that made her breath catch. She felt safe. Not the tentative, waiting for disaster safety of the past few days, but genuine bone-deep safety. The kind that let you relax your shoulders and take a full breath and think about tomorrow without dread. It was terrifying. That night, Lila lay in her bed with the door locked and tried to understand what was happening to her. The old Lila, the one who'd stood on the auction platform 3 weeks ago, would have been suspicious of Ethan's continued kindness, would have been waiting for the moment when his patience ran out and his true nature revealed itself. But this new Lila, the one who was slowly emerging from the protective shell of silence and submission, was starting to believe that maybe Ethan was exactly who he appeared to be. A decent man doing his best to help someone who needed it. No hidden agenda, no waiting cost, no ledger of debts that would eventually come due. The thought was as liberating as it was frightening. The next morning, Lila woke before dawn. She lay in the gray pre-light, listening to the sounds of the cabin waking around her. A coyote called in the distance. The wind rattled the shutters, and from the main room she heard Ethan moving around, starting the fire, beginning his day. She rose and dressed quickly, driven by an impulse she didn't entirely understand. When she emerged from her room, Ethan looked up from the stove in surprise. "You're up early." "I want to learn," Lila said. The words came out stronger than she'd intended, almost demanding. "To cook, I mean. Really learn, not just watch. I want to be able to do it myself." Ethan's face broke into a slow smile. "All right then. Come here and I'll show you how to make biscuits from scratch. Fair warning, my biscuits are good but not great. Margaret's were better, and I never quite figured out her secret." "Maybe we can figure it out together," Lila said. And so began what would become their morning routine. Ethan would wake and start the fire, but Lila would join him in the kitchen, and he would teach her to cook. Not just the basics, boiling water, frying eggs, but the skills that turned cooking from chore into craft. How to make bread that rose properly, how to render fat for frying, how to preserve vegetables for winter, how to turn tough cuts of meat tender through low, patient heat. He taught her the way Margaret had apparently taught him, with patience and humor and the understanding that mistakes were part of learning. When Lila's first attempt at biscuits came out dense as stones, Ethan ate one anyway, chewing thoughtfully before pronouncing it character-building. "That's a polite way of saying terrible," Lila said, but she was almost smiling. "That's an honest way of saying you'll do better next time. And you will." He tossed the rock-hard biscuit to his dog, a cattle dog named Sam, who Lila had only recently met, as he spent most of his time with the herd. Sam sniffed it, looked betrayed, and walked away. "See? Even Sam knows you've got nowhere to go but up." The days began to blur together in the best possible way. Mornings in the kitchen, learning to cook. Afternoons helping with ranch chores, mending fences, moving cattle, mucking stalls, hauling water. Evenings eating together, talking about everything and nothing, slowly building a friendship that felt miraculous in its simplicity. Ethan told her about the war, about the friends he'd lost, and the things he'd seen that still woke him at night. Lila told him about the foundling home, about the basement rooms and the fear that had become so constant she'd stopped noticing it. They traded stories like currency, each revelation buying trust, building the foundation of something neither of them had names for yet. "Do you ever get lonely out here?" Lila asked one evening as they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the sky impossible colors. "Sometimes," Ethan admitted, "especially right after Margaret died. The silence was oppressive then, but I got used to it, found a kind of peace in the solitude. I'd rather be alone than surrounded by people who make me feel small or afraid or less than human." "I understand that," Lila said softly. "I was surrounded by people at the foundling home, but I've never felt more alone. At least here, the loneliness is clean. It doesn't have teeth." Ethan glanced at her, and something in his expression made Lila's heart skip. "You're not alone anymore," he said quietly. "You know that, right?" Did she? Lila wanted to believe it, but belief required vulnerability, required trusting that this fragile piece wouldn't shatter the moment she let herself depend on it. "I'm trying to know it," she said finally. "It's hard to unlearn what you've spent your whole life learning." "I know, but Lila, you're doing it. Every day you're here, every choice you make to trust instead of fear, you're unlearning. I can see it happening." A week became two became three. The nightmares came less frequently, and when they did, Lila found she could soothe herself back to sleep without the paralyzing fear that used to accompany them. Her hands grew calloused from work, her skin tanned from long days in the sun, her body grew stronger from regular meals and physical labor. She was changing, Lila realized. Not just healing, but actually changing, becoming someone new. Someone who laughed when Sam the dog stole a biscuit off the counter. Someone who felt pride when the bread she baked rose properly. Someone who could meet Ethan's eyes without flinching, who could disagree with him about the best way to mend a fence without fearing retribution. Someone who was beginning to believe she deserved good things. "I want to pay you," Lila announced one morning over breakfast. Ethan paused mid-bite. "Pay me what?" "For the clothes, the food, everything. I want to work for you, really work, like a ranch hand, and you can pay me wages, and I'll give it all back until I've repaid what I owe." "Lila, you don't owe me. I know you've said that, but I need to do this. I need to feel like I'm earning my place here instead of just accepting charity." She met his eyes steadily. "Please." Ethan set down his fork, considering. "All right, here's what we'll do. I'll pay you standard ranch hand wages, $3 a week plus room and board. You can save it, spend it, or throw it in the creek for all I care. It's yours to do with as you please. But Lila, I want you to understand that you've already earned your place here 10 times over. The work you've done, the company you've provided, that has value too." $3 a week. It wasn't much, but it was more money than Lila had ever had in her life. Money that was hers, that she'd earned through her own labor. The thought made her giddy. "Deal," she said, and held out her hand. Ethan shook it solemnly, his calloused palm warm against hers. "You drive a hard bargain, Miss Monroe." "I learned from the best, Mr. Hale." That afternoon, Ethan rode into town for supplies and returned with fabric, beautiful fabric in deep blue, enough for a dress. He handed it to Lila with studied casualness. "Ruth mentioned you might like this, said the color would suit you." Lila held the fabric, feeling its weight, its quality. It was nicer than anything she'd ever owned, the kind of fabric that became an heirloom dress, something you wore to important occasions. "I can't accept this," she said, even as every part of her wanted to. "Why not?" "It's too much, too expensive." "Lila, it's fabric, and you're going to need a nice dress eventually. Might as well be one you like." He paused. "Besides, I already bought it. You refusing it doesn't give me my money back, just means I've got fabric I can't use. So really, you'd be doing me a favor by taking it." The logic was absurd, and they both knew it, but Lila found herself smiling anyway. "You're impossible." "I've been called worse." Ethan headed for the door. "I'm going to check on the herd. You coming?" Lila looked down at the blue fabric in her hands, then back at Ethan's retreating form. A month ago, she would have been terrified by a gift, suspicious of the hidden cost. Now she understood it for what it was: kindness without agenda, generosity without strings. "I'm coming," she called, carefully folding the fabric and setting it aside. As she followed Ethan out into the afternoon sun, Lila realized something that stopped her in her tracks. She was happy. Not momentarily pleased or temporarily relieved, but genuinely, deeply happy in a way she'd never experienced before. She was safe. She was valued. She was becoming someone she actually liked. And for the first time in her 19 years of life, Lila Monroe believed she might actually deserve it. The days that followed established a rhythm that Lila had never experienced before, predictable without being oppressive, structured without being confining. She woke each morning to the sound of Ethan moving quietly in the main room, starting the fire, putting coffee on to boil. She would lie in bed for a few extra minutes, savoring the luxury of waking without fear, then dress in her new clothes and emerge to find breakfast waiting. At first she tried to take over the cooking. It seemed wrong, somehow, to let Ethan continue doing all the domestic work when that was supposed to be her domain, her contribution. But when she'd hesitantly suggested it on the third morning, Ethan had simply shrugged. "Can you cook?" he'd asked. "Yes, I learned at the foundling home." "Better than me?" Lila had paused, unsure if this was a test. "I don't know. I haven't tasted enough of your cooking to say." Ethan had smiled at that, the expression transforming his usually serious face. "Tell you what, we'll take turns. You cook when you want to, I'll cook when I want to. Or we'll cook together. No rules about who's supposed to do what, we just do what needs doing. Fair?" Fair. Such a simple word, but one that had been absent from Lila's vocabulary for so long it felt foreign. But she'd nodded, and that was how they'd proceeded. Some mornings Ethan cooked, some mornings Lila did. Some mornings they worked side by side in the small kitchen, learning each other's rhythms without discussion or negotiation. After breakfast, there was always work. The ranch demanded constant attention: fences to mend, cattle to check, the garden to tend, chickens to feed, hay to stack for winter. Ethan never ordered Lila to help, never assigned her tasks or criticized when she didn't know how to do something. Instead, he simply did what needed doing, and Lila found herself falling into step beside him, learning through observation and careful questions. "Why do you check the fence line every day?" she asked one morning as they rode out together, the sun still low on the horizon. "Because one break can lose you half your herd," Ethan replied. "Cattle find a gap, they'll wander through it. Then you're spending days rounding them up, hoping they haven't gotten too far or been taken by rustlers. Prevention's easier than cure. Has that happened to you?" "Once. First year I was here. Lost 15 head because I got lazy about checking. Taught me a lesson I won't forget." He glanced at her. "You don't have to come on these rides, you know. It's boring work." "I like it," Lila said, and realized with surprise that it was true. She liked the open space, the quiet broken only by bird song and wind, the simple purpose of riding from one fence post to the next. It was meditative, almost, a way to let her mind settle after years of constant vigilance. Ethan nodded as if he understood. Margaret used to say the same thing. That checking fence was like prayer, only better because you could see the results of your devotion. It was the first time he'd mentioned Margaret voluntarily. Lila had learned not to press when he went quiet, had learned that Ethan's silences were thoughtful rather than angry, but she found herself curious about the woman who'd shaped him. What was she like? Lila asked carefully. Ethan was quiet for so long that Lila thought he wasn't going to answer. Then he spoke, his voice carrying across the prairie. Strong. Not in the loud way some people are strong, but in the way that water's strong, patient, persistent, carving through stone just by refusing to give up. She'd been a nurse during the war, saw terrible things, worse than I saw probably, but she never let it make her hard. She chose kindness deliberately, every day, like it was an act of rebellion against all that darkness. How did you meet her? After the war, I drifted for a while, didn't know what to do with myself. Ended up in Denver, drinking too much, fighting too much, well, on my way to an early grave. Margaret worked at a charity hospital there. I got into a brawl one night, took a knife to the ribs. Woke up in her ward with her standing over me telling me I was an idiot, and if I wanted to die so badly I should at least have the courtesy to do it somewhere that wouldn't make extra work for her. Despite herself, Lila smiled. What did you say? I told her I'd try to be more considerate about my dying. She told me I'd better be more considerate about my living instead. Then she kept me in that hospital for 2 weeks longer than necessary, making sure I ate proper meals, talked to someone about the war, started remembering I was human. Ethan's voice went soft. She saved my life. Not just that night, but every day after. And you loved her. More than I knew it was possible to love anyone. He paused. When the cholera came, she wouldn't stop working. Wouldn't leave the patients who needed her, even when people were dying by the dozens. She caught it herself, and by the time she let someone treat her, it was too late. I held her hand while she died, and the last thing she said to me was, "Don't waste this," meaning the life she'd given back to me, meaning do something good with it. Lila felt tears prick her eyes. Is that why you bought me? To honor her? Partly, but also because when I saw you on that platform, I saw myself in that hospital bed, someone who'd given up, who couldn't see a way forward, who needed someone to remember they were worth saving. Margaret did that for me. Figured I could do it for you. They rode in silence for a while, and Lila turned his words over in her mind. She'd spent so long thinking of herself as a burden, as something broken and worthless, that the idea of being worth saving felt revolutionary. I don't know if I can be what she was, Lila said finally. Strong like that. You already are, Ethan said simply. You survived, didn't you? Survived things that would have broken most people. That's strength, Lila. Different kind than Margaret's maybe, but just as real. The fence line was intact that day, and they returned to the cabin in comfortable quiet. Lila had learned that Ethan didn't need constant conversation, didn't fill silence with meaningless words. He was content to let quiet exist without making it awkward, and Lila found that restful. That afternoon, while Ethan worked on repairing a saddle, Lila decided to tackle the garden. It had been planted earlier in the season but was now overrun with weeds, the vegetables struggling to survive amid the competition. She found tools in the barn and set to work, pulling weeds with methodical determination. The physical labor felt good, felt purposeful. Each weed removed gave the carrots and beans more room to grow, more access to water and nutrients. It was satisfying in a way that cooking and cleaning never had been. Those tasks were never finished, just temporarily completed until they needed doing again. But weeding was cumulative. Every weed pulled stayed pulled. She worked for hours until her back ached and her hands were stained with dirt. When she finally stood and surveyed her progress, she felt something unfamiliar swell in her chest. Pride, maybe. Satisfaction at work well done. You've been busy, Ethan said from behind her. Lila turned to find him leaning against the fence, watching her with an expression she couldn't quite read. The garden needed it. I hope that's all right. More than all right. I've been meaning to get to it for weeks, but there's always something else demanding attention. You did good work here, Lila. The compliment warmed her more than it should have. She'd been complimented before, at the foundling home, when she performed her duties exactly as expected, but those compliments had always felt conditional, temporary, something that could be revoked the moment she made a mistake. Ethan's praise felt different, felt genuine. "Thank you for saying so," she said quietly. "I'm not just saying it. Look at this." He gestured to the neat rows of vegetables, now visible without the choking weeds. "This is real work, Lila. Work that matters. You should be proud of it." Pride. There was that word again. Lila tested the feeling, trying it on like one of her new dresses. It fit better than she'd expected. That evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and purple, Ethan brought up something Lila had been both anticipating and dreading. "I've been thinking," he said, "about what happens next. Long term, I mean." Lila's stomach clenched. Here it came. The moment when he'd explained that his generosity had limits, that she needed to move on, that she'd overstayed her welcome. "You can stay here as long as you want," Ethan continued. "But I figure at some point you'll want your own life, your own place, your own choices about how to spend your days. So I've been asking around, seeing what opportunities might exist." "What kind of opportunities?" Lila's voice came out smaller than she intended. "Ruth at the trading post mentioned she could use help a few days a week. There's a family about 3 hours south, the Hendersons, who need someone to help with their children while Mrs. Henderson recovers from a difficult birth. And there's always domestic work in town if you wanted to go that route, though I'd want to make sure you were working for decent people, not the kind who'd take advantage." He was helping her leave. The realization hit Lila with unexpected force. He was actively working to give her independence, to set her up for a life separate from his. It was the kindest thing anyone had ever done for her, and it hurt in a way she didn't fully understand. "What if I don't want to leave?" The words escaped before Lila could stop them. Ethan turned to look at her, his expression unreadable in the fading light. "Then you don't leave. Like I said, you can stay as long as you want. But Lila, you should stay because you choose to, not because you don't think you have other options. You deserve to have options." "I've never had options before," Lila admitted. "I don't know how to choose." "Then we'll figure it out together. No rush. Take your time. See what feels right." He paused. "But I want you to know something. Whatever you decide, wherever you go, you'll always have a place here. Always. This isn't about me wanting to get rid of you. It's about me wanting you to have the freedom to build whatever life you want." Lila nodded, not trusting herself to speak. The conversation settled between them. Not uncomfortable, but weighted with possibility. She had options. She had choices. She had a man who cared enough to ensure she could exercise those choices freely. The thought was both terrifying and exhilarating. As the weeks passed, Lila found herself settling into life on the ranch with increasing comfort. The constant fear that had been her companion for so long began to fade, replaced by something she could only describe as peace. She woke without dread. She moved through her days without waiting for disaster. She went to sleep behind her locked door knowing she would wake safe. The work continued. There was always work on a ranch. But Lila discovered she liked it, liked the rhythm of physical labor, the tangible results of effort applied. She learned to milk the cow Ethan kept for fresh dairy, learned to gather eggs without startling the chickens, learned to ride well enough that Ethan trusted her to check the near fence lines alone. One morning, about a month after her arrival, Lila woke to find Ethan already gone. A note on the table explained he'd ridden to the Henderson place to help with some fence building, wouldn't be back until evening. It was the first time she'd been alone at the ranch, and Lila spent a moment processing the trust implicit in the act. He'd left her here, alone, with access to everything he owned. If she wanted to rob him and disappear, this would be her chance. The thought was so absurd that Lila almost laughed. Rob Ethan, the man who'd given her everything and asked for nothing? The man who treated her like a person deserving of dignity and respect? It would be like robbing herself. Instead, she spent the day doing what she'd wanted to do for weeks. She cleaned. Not the surface cleaning that kept the cabin functional, but deep cleaning. She scrubbed floors until they gleamed, washed windows until they sparkled, organized shelves, mended the tiers and curtains she'd noticed but hadn't felt entitled to fix. In Ethan's room, which she entered hesitantly, feeling like an intruder despite his note saying to make herself at home, she found the photograph from the mantel sitting on his bedside table. A young woman with kind eyes and a gentle smile looked out from the frame, her hand resting on the shoulder of a much younger Ethan who gazed at her with obvious adoration. Margaret. This was Margaret. Lila studied the photograph, trying to understand the woman who'd shaped Ethan into who he was. She looked ordinary in the way that truly extraordinary people often did. No exceptional beauty, no commanding presence, just quiet strength captured in the curve of her smile and the steadiness of her gaze. "I wish I could have met you," Lila whispered to the photograph. "I wish I could thank you for teaching him how to be kind." She set the photograph back carefully and continued her cleaning. By the time Ethan returned as the sun was setting, the cabin gleamed. He stopped in the doorway, looking around with obvious surprise. "What did you do?" he asked. Lila felt suddenly uncertain. "I cleaned. I hope that's all right. I wasn't trying to say your housekeeping was inadequate. I just I needed to do something useful." "Lila." Ethan set down his saddle and crossed to where she stood, wringing her hands. "This is more than all right. This is incredible. But you didn't need to do this to prove you're useful. You don't owe me labor for letting you stay." "I know. At least I'm starting to know, but I wanted to do it. For me, not for you. Does that make sense?" Understanding dawned on Ethan's face. "It does. This was about taking ownership, wasn't it? About making this place partly yours." Lila nodded. That was exactly what it had been, though she hadn't articulated it even to herself until Ethan said it aloud. By cleaning the cabin, by caring for it, she'd been claiming space in a way she'd never been allowed to before. "Well then," Ethan said, a smile playing at his lips. "Thank you. The place has never looked better." That night, Lila cooked dinner, venison stew with vegetables from the now thriving garden. They ate together as had become their custom, talking about small things. Ethan told her about the Hendersons, how their new baby was thriving, how grateful they were for help with the fence. Lila told him about the family of rabbits she'd spotted near the garden, how she'd chased them away but couldn't quite bring herself to shoot them, despite knowing they'd be back for the vegetables. "We'll set up some fencing," Ethan said. "Keep them out without killing them. No need for death when prevention works just as well." It was such a small thing, but it revealed something essential about Ethan's character. He looked for solutions that minimized harm, even to creatures most people would consider pests. Margaret had taught him well. After dinner, as Lila washed dishes and Ethan dried, he brought up something that had been on his mind. "There's a dance in town next Saturday," he said. "Community gathering, happens every few months. Music, food, chance for folks to socialize. I usually don't go, but I was thinking maybe you'd like to. Chance to meet people who aren't me." Lila's first instinct was to refuse. The thought of being around that many strangers, of being looked at and judged, made her stomach clench. But then she thought about what Ethan had said about options, about building the life she wanted. If she wanted a life that included other people, and she was starting to think maybe she did, she'd have to start somewhere. "Would you come with me?" she asked. "If you want me to." "I do. I don't think I can. I'm not ready to go alone." "Then we'll go together," Ethan said simply. "Fair warning, though, I'm a terrible dancer. 2 left feet and no sense of rhythm. Margaret used to say dancing with me was like wrestling a bear." The image made Lila smile, and she realized she'd been smiling more lately. Small smiles, cautious ones, but real nonetheless. "I don't know how to dance at all, so we'll be evenly matched." "Perfect. We'll step on each other's feet equally and call it fair." The dance was both exactly what Lila expected and nothing like she'd imagined. The barn where it was held had been decorated with lanterns and bunting, transforming the utilitarian space into something almost magical. Music filled the air, a fiddle, a guitar, someone on a makeshift drum, playing songs that were lively and infectious. People were everywhere, talking and laughing and dancing with unselfconscious joy. Children ran between adults' legs, playing games Lila didn't know the rules to. Women clustered in groups, trading gossip and recipes. Men stood in circles, discussing weather and cattle prices and politics. Lila stood frozen in the doorway, overwhelmed. Ethan's hand found her elbow, steadying without restraining. "We can leave any time you want," he murmured. "Just say the word." But Lila didn't want to leave. She wanted to be brave enough to stay, to be part of this, to remember what it felt like to be among people who weren't a threat. Ruth spotted them first and came over with the determined stride of a woman on a mission. "Ethan Hale, you actually came. I'd begun to think you'd turned into a hermit permanently." "Just because I don't socialize doesn't mean I'm a hermit, Ruth." Distinction without a difference. Ruth turned to Lila with a warm smile. And look at you. Those clothes are treating you well. How are you settling in? Well, thank you, Lila managed. The ranch it's nice. Nice, Ruth repeated with amusement. High praise indeed. Well, come on then. Let me introduce you around. Can't have you standing in the corner all night like wallflowers. What followed was a whirlwind of names and faces that Lila knew she'd never remember. The Hendersons, grateful for Ethan's help with their fence. The Blackwoods, who ran sheep on the adjacent property. The Tanners, whose daughter was close to Lila's age and immediately attached herself to Lila with friendly enthusiasm. You have to tell me everything, Sarah Tanner said, linking her arm through Lila's without asking permission. We so rarely get new people out here, and I'm desperate for someone to talk to who isn't my brothers. Do you like to read? I have books I could lend you. Do you sew? Mother's trying to teach me, but I'm hopeless at it. The barrage of questions should have been overwhelming, but Sarah's genuine friendliness was disarming. Lila found herself answering, cautiously at first, then with increasing comfort, as Sarah proved to be exactly what she seemed, a lonely girl grateful for potential friendship. Ethan, meanwhile, had been absorbed into a group of ranchers discussing something that involved a lot of hand gestures and serious faces. But every few minutes, Lila noticed, his eyes would find her across the room, checking that she was all right. When she caught him looking, he'd nod slightly. A silent question. She'd nod back. A silent answer. I'm okay. I'm safe. The dancing started in earnest as the evening progressed. Couples took to the floor with varying degrees of skill, and Lila watched from the sidelines, fascinated by the patterns and rhythms. It looked complicated and wonderful, this physical expression of joy. Would you like to try? Lila turned to find Ethan beside her, holding out his hand. In the lantern light, he looked younger somehow, less burdened. The music was slower now, a waltz that even Lila's inexperienced eye could tell was more forgiving than the earlier reels. I'll step on your feet, she warned. I'm counting on it. Helps me feel less inadequate about stepping on yours. Lila placed her hand in his, and Ethan led her onto the floor. His other hand settled at her waist, and for the first time, Lila didn't flinch at a man's touch. Ethan had earned that trust through weeks of patient kindness, through never taking more than she freely offered. Just follow my lead, he said. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. Feel the rhythm? Lila tried to feel it, tried to let her body move with the music. She stepped on his feet twice in the first minute, apologizing profusely both times. Ethan just laughed. Actually laughed, a sound Lila had rarely heard from him. See? Told you I was terrible at this, he said. Margaret tried for years to teach me proper, never took. But as the song continued, something shifted. Lila stopped thinking so hard about the steps and started trusting Ethan to guide her. Her body found the rhythm, matched itself to his movements. They weren't good, not by any objective measure, but they were together, moving as a unit, and that felt like its own kind of success. When the song ended, Lila was breathless and smiling, really smiling, wide enough that her cheeks hurt. Ethan was smiling too, and for a moment they just stood there on the dance floor, surrounded by other couples, but somehow separate from them, sharing something Lila didn't have words for. Thank you, she said. For stepping on your feet? For bringing me? For teaching me? For... She stopped, unable to articulate the enormity of what she wanted to thank him for. For everything. For her life back. You're welcome, Ethan said, and she knew he understood. They danced twice more before Lila's feet, still tender despite the sturdy boots, protested enough that she had to stop. They found seats along the wall, and Sarah Tanner brought them cups of punch and chattered happily about the local gossip. Lila half listened, content to just observe, to be part of this community gathering without pressure to perform or prove anything. On the ride home, with the stars brilliant overhead and the night air cool against her face, Lila reflected on how much had changed in just a month. She'd gone from a girl who couldn't imagine tomorrow to a woman who was starting to plan for next week, next month, maybe even next year. Did you have a good time? Ethan asked. I did. Better than I expected. Lila paused. Sarah invited me to visit next week, to borrow books, and I think just to talk. Would that be all right? Lila, You don't need my permission to make friends or go visiting. You're not a prisoner here. I know, I wanted you to know, in case you needed help with something that day. The ranch will survive a day without you, Ethan said gently. Go see Sarah, make friends, build relationships. That's important. What about you? Do you have friends? Ethan was quiet for a moment. Had them once. Lost most during the war, lost touch with others after Margaret died. Haven't been great about maintaining connections since then. That sounds lonely. It is, Ethan admitted, but it's been easier than the alternative. Easier than letting people in and risking losing them again. Lila understood that impulse intimately. Is that why you live out here alone? To avoid the risk? Partly. Also because I'm not sure I'm fit for polite society anymore. I've seen too much, done too much. Sometimes it feels like there's a wall between me and normal people, and I can't quite breach it. I don't think you're as separated as you believe, Lila said carefully. Tonight, watching you with those ranchers, with Ruth, even dancing with me, you connected. Maybe not easily, maybe not without effort, but you did it. Maybe, Ethan said, but he sounded unconvinced. They rode the rest of the way in companionable silence. When they reached the cabin, Ethan helped Lila down from her horse with his usual careful courtesy. But this time, when his hands gripped her waist, when she placed her palms on his shoulders for balance, Lila didn't feel the automatic spike of fear. She felt safe, secure, cared for. Ethan, she said as he started to step away. He paused. Yeah? I'm glad you bought me. The words felt inadequate, but they were true. I'm glad it was you and not anyone else. Something shifted in Ethan's expression, became almost vulnerable. I'm glad too, Lila. More than you know. That night, Lila lay in her bed in her room, in a place that was starting to feel like home, and thought about the future. For the first time in her life, the future didn't seem like something to dread or endure, but something to anticipate. Something that might hold joy alongside hardship, connection alongside isolation, growth alongside pain. She thought about Sarah's friendship, about the possibility of community. She thought about the ranch work, about how competent she'd become at tasks she'd never attempted before. She thought about Ethan's patient teaching, his steady presence, his unwavering belief that she was worth the effort. And she thought about the dress buried in the bottom of her trunk, the filthy, torn thing she'd worn to the auction. She'd kept it, at first because it was all she had from her old life, but maybe it was time to let it go. Maybe it was time to acknowledge that she wasn't that terrified girl on the platform anymore. Maybe she was becoming someone new. The next morning, Lila woke with purpose. After breakfast, while Ethan worked on repairing a broken harness, she retrieved the dress from her trunk, carried it outside to the fire pit they used for burning refuse, stood there holding it, feeling the weight of everything it represented. Ethan noticed and came over, wiping his hands on a rag. What are you doing? Letting go, Lila said. This dress, it's from a life I don't want to carry anymore. I thought maybe burning it might help. Ethan studied her face, then nodded slowly. If that's what you need. Will you stay with me while I do it? Of course. Lila laid the dress in the fire pit, struck a match, and held it to the fabric. The old cotton caught quickly, flames licking up the material and consuming it with surprising speed. Within minutes, all that remained was ash and a few charred fragments. She stood there, watching the last smoke curl into the clear morning air, and felt something release in her chest. The girl who'd worn that dress was gone. In her place stood someone stronger, someone learning to claim her own life, someone discovering what it meant to choose instead of merely survive. Ethan's hand found her shoulder, squeezed gently. You all right? Lila took a deep breath, let it out slowly. Yeah, I think I am. And for the first time since she could remember, she meant it. The weeks after burning the dress marked a shift in Lila that even she could feel. It was as if watching that fabric turn to ash had freed something inside her, some tightly wound spring that had finally been allowed to uncoil. She moved through the world differently now, with her shoulders back, her chin up, her eyes meeting people's gazes instead of studying the ground. Sarah Tanner became a regular part of her life. Once a week, Lila would ride to the Tanner homestead and spend the afternoon with Sarah, talking about books and dreams and all the small concerns that filled young women's lives. Sarah's mother, a kind woman worn thin by prairie life and too many children, seemed grateful for the friendship, often sending Lila home with fresh bread or preserves. "You're good for Sarah," Mrs. Tanner said one afternoon as Lila prepared to leave. "She's been lonely out here. We all are, I suppose, but it's harder on the young ones. They need friends their own age." "She's good for me, too," Lila replied honestly. Sarah's uncomplicated friendship was a revelation, proof that not all relationships were transactional, that sometimes people simply enjoyed each other's company without ulterior motives. At the ranch, Lila's confidence grew daily. She could now handle most of the daily chores without instruction, could make decisions about when to plant, when to harvest, when the cattle needed supplemental feed. Ethan trusted her judgment increasingly, often asking her opinion on ranch matters as if her thoughts held genuine weight. "What do you think about expanding the chicken coop?" he asked one evening over dinner. "We've got enough hens now that they're crowded. But building a bigger coop means lumber and time, and I'm not sure if the egg production justifies it." 6 weeks ago, Lila would have deferred to whatever Ethan thought best. Now she considered the question seriously, weighing factors the way she'd learned from watching him make decisions. "The hens are stressed," she said finally. "I've noticed more pecking, more broken eggs. If we expand the coop, production would likely increase enough to offset the cost, especially if we sell the extra eggs at the trading post. Ruth mentioned she could use a steady supply." Ethan smiled, that rare, full smile that transformed his face. "See? This is why I ask you. You notice things I miss. All right, we'll expand the coop. Can you draw up plans for what you think we'd need?" The casual assignment of such responsibility would have terrified Lila weeks ago. Now it felt like validation, like proof that she'd become someone capable and worthy of trust. That night she sat at the table with paper and pencil, sketching out dimensions and calculating materials, feeling a quiet pride in her growing abilities. But not everything was easy. There were still hard days, days when the past crept up on Lila like a shadow she couldn't quite shake. Days when a sudden noise made her flinch, when a stranger's approach triggered old fears, when the weight of everything she'd survived threatened to crush her. One such day came in early autumn. Lila had ridden to the trading post alone, something she'd done several times now without incident. But when she arrived, she found Gibbs there, the tobacco-stained man from the auction. He was older, meaner, and clearly drunk. "Well, well," he slurred when he spotted her. "If it isn't Hale's little purchase. Tell me, girl, was he worth 3 coins, or did he get cheated?" Lila froze. Every instinct screamed at her to run, to hide, to make herself small and invisible. But she'd worked too hard, come too far, to let this man reduce her to that terrified girl on the auction platform. "Mr. Gibbs," she said, proud that her voice stayed steady. "I need to get past you." "Need to get past me?" Gibbs laughed, a wet, ugly sound. "What's the magic word? Or does Hale not teach his property manners?" "I'm not property." The words came out stronger than Lila expected. "I'm a person. Now please move." Gibbs's expression darkened. He stepped toward her, and Lila's heart hammered against her ribs. But before he could reach her, Ruth appeared from the back room, shotgun in hand. "Gibbs, you touch that girl, and I'll blow a hole in you big enough to drive a wagon through," Ruth said conversationally. "Now get out of my store before I decide to shoot you for the general principle of making the world a better place." Gibbs looked between Ruth and Lila, seemed to calculate his odds, then spat on the floor and stumbled toward the door. "Ain't worth the trouble anyway," he muttered. After he left, Lila found she was shaking. Ruth set down the shotgun and pulled her into a brief, fierce hug. "You did good, honey. Stood up to him, didn't back down. That took courage." "I was terrified," Lila admitted. "Courage isn't not being scared. It's being scared and doing the right thing anyway. You remember that." Ruth studied her face. "You gonna tell Ethan about this?" Lila nodded. She'd learned that secrets festered, that sharing burdens made them lighter. And more than that, she wanted to tell Ethan. Wanted to share this victory, because it was a victory, standing up to Gibbs, with someone who'd understand what it meant. When she returned to the ranch, Ethan was mending fence near the barn. He looked up as she approached, and something in her expression must have alerted him because he immediately set down his tools. "What happened?" Lila told him everything. Watched his jaw tighten, saw the controlled anger in his eyes, but also saw him hold back, waiting for her to finish rather than immediately riding off to confront Gibbs himself. "I'm proud of you," he said when she was done, "for standing up to him, for not letting him make you feel small." "Ruth's the one who made him leave," Lila pointed out. "Ruth gave you backup, but you're the one who stood your ground, who told him you weren't property. That came from you, Lila. That's strength." "I learned it from you," she said quietly. "From watching how you move through the world. You never back down from what's right, never let fear make your decisions. I wanted to be like that." Ethan was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "I need to tell you something about why I really bought you that day." Lila waited, sensing this was important. "I told you Margaret taught me kindness, and that's true. But there's more to it." Ethan stared out at the prairie, his expression distant. "After she died, I was angry. Angry at the world, at fate, at everything. I started thinking maybe kindness was pointless, that no matter how much good you tried to do, death and suffering won on anyway. I was close to giving up on everything she taught me. What changed? You did. When I saw you on that platform looking so defeated, I had a choice. I could walk away, tell myself it wasn't my problem, let the darkness win. Or I could do what Margaret would have done, help because help was needed, be kind because kindness mattered. Buying you wasn't charity, Lila. It was me choosing to be the man Margaret believed I could be. You saved me as much as I saved you." The revelation hit Lila with unexpected force. She'd spent weeks thinking of herself as the one who'd been rescued, the one who owed a debt of gratitude. But Ethan was telling her it went both ways, that her presence here had given him something he needed, just as much as his had given her safety and space to heal. "So we saved each other," she said softly. "Looks like." Ethan finally turned to meet her eyes. "And I want you to know, whatever happens next, whatever you decide about your future, that won't change. You'll always matter to me, Lila. Not as property, not as obligation, but as someone I care about." The words hung between them, weighted with meaning neither of them was quite ready to fully acknowledge. Lila felt something shift in her chest, something warm and terrifying and wonderful all at once. She cared about Ethan too, cared about him in ways that had nothing to do with gratitude and everything to do with who he was, patient, kind, strong in the ways that mattered. But caring led to vulnerability, and vulnerability led to the potential for pain. Lila wasn't sure she was ready for that yet. "I care about you too," she said finally, because not saying it felt like lying. "You've given me my life back. More than that, you've given me a life worth living." Ethan nodded, seeming to understand that this was as far as either of them could push right now. "Come on, let's get some dinner started. I'm thinking we use some of those carrots from the garden you've been tending so well." They walked back to the cabin side by side, and if their hands brushed once, twice, neither of them mentioned it. That night, Lila lay awake thinking about the future, about what she wanted, not what she thought she should want or what others expected of her. For weeks, Ethan had been asking her to consider her options, to think about what came next. And suddenly, lying there in the darkness, Lila knew. She wanted to stay. Not because she had nowhere else to go, not out of obligation or fear of the unknown. She wanted to stay because this place, this ranch, this life, this man, had become home in a way nowhere else ever had. She wanted to wake up to coffee brewing in Ethan's quiet presence. She wanted to tend the garden and check fence lines and dance badly at community gatherings. She wanted to keep learning who she was in a place that gave her the freedom to figure it out. And maybe, eventually, she wanted more than that. Wanted to see if the careful friendship she and Ethan had built could become something deeper, something lasting. But that could wait. First, she needed to claim this life as her own, make the active choice to stay rather than simply remaining by default. The next morning, Lila found Ethan already up, as usual. She poured coffee, gathered her courage, and sat down across from him. "I've been thinking about what you said, about options, and choosing my future." Ethan looked up from his breakfast, his expression careful. "And? I want to stay here, at the ranch, with you." Lila paused, making sure he understood. "Not because I don't think I have other choices. I know I could work at the trading post or for the Hendersons or somewhere else, but I don't want those things. I want this. I want to keep building what we've started here. You're sure? Because Lila, I need you to be absolutely certain. I need to know you're choosing this freely, not out of some sense of obligation or, I'm sure, Lila interrupted. For the first time in my life, I'm completely sure about something. This is where I want to be. This is the life I want to build. Relief flooded Ethan's face, so profound that Lila realized he'd been worried she'd leave. Then you'll stay, as long as you want. And we'll figure out the details as we go. Maybe we draw up some kind of partnership agreement, make it official that you're not an employee or a guest, but an equal partner in running this place. A partner, Lila repeated, testing the word. She liked how it felt. Yes, I'd like that. They shook hands across the table, formal and a bit silly, but it felt important. A declaration of intention, a commitment freely made on both sides. Over the following weeks, they worked out the practicalities. Ethan taught Lila about the ranch's finances, showed her the ledgers where he tracked expenses and income. They discussed expansion plans, maybe more cattle next spring, maybe trying their hand at horse breeding. Lila suggested improvements to the irrigation system for the garden, sketched plans for a root cellar that would let them store vegetables through the winter. They worked side by side, partners in truth as well as name. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, the nature of their relationship began to shift. It started with small things. Ethan's hand lingering a moment longer when he helped her down from her horse. Lila finding excuses to sit closer to him on the porch during evening talks. Conversations that stretched later into the night, covering everything from childhood memories to hopes for the future. Sarah noticed during one of Lila's visits. "You're glowing," she said bluntly. "Is it Ethan? Are you two—" "We're partners," Lila said quickly. "Friends." "Friends don't look at each other the way you two look at each other," Sarah said, with the confidence of someone who'd read far too many romantic novels. "Trust me, I've seen the way his face changes when you walk into a room, and the way you light up when you talk about him." Did she light up? Lila examined her feelings carefully, trying to be honest with herself. Yes, she realized, she did. Ethan had become the center point of her world, not because she needed him for survival, but because she simply liked being around him, liked his quiet strength, his dry humor, the way he treated her like an equal, while still being protective when protection was needed. But liking someone and being ready for something more were different things. Lila had spent her whole life learning to be afraid of men, afraid of what they'd take if given the chance. Unlearning that fear, choosing to be vulnerable with someone, felt impossibly difficult. The moment of reckoning came on a cold November evening. Lila and Ethan had spent the day preparing the ranch for winter, securing loose boards on the barn, stacking extra firewood, making sure the cattle had adequate shelter. It was hard work, and by the time they finished, both were exhausted. They sat on the porch despite the chill, wrapped in blankets, watching the sun set in brilliant shades of orange and red. The silence between them was comfortable, familiar. Lila had learned to love these quiet moments, when words weren't necessary and presence was enough. "Lila," Ethan said finally, "can I ask you something?" "Always." "Are you happy here? I mean really happy, not just safe or comfortable, but actually happy." Lila considered the question seriously. Was she happy? She thought about mornings in the kitchen, about the satisfaction of a day's work well done, about Sarah's friendship and Ruth's gruff affection, about dancing badly with Ethan at community gatherings and riding across the prairie with wind in her hair, about having a place that was hers, choices that were hers, a life that was hers. "Yes," she said, "I'm happy, happier than I ever thought possible." "Good. That's good." Ethan seemed to struggle with something, then continued, "Because I need you to know that this, what we have, it's enough for me. If you want to keep things exactly as they are, as partners and friends, I'll be content with that. But if you ever wanted something more, I need you to know I'd welcome that too." Lila's breath caught. There it was, the question she'd been circling around for weeks. Ethan was offering her more, but in the most careful way possible, making it clear she could say no without consequence. What would more look like? she asked quietly. I don't know exactly. Whatever you'd be comfortable with. Maybe just acknowledging that what we feel goes beyond friendship. Maybe eventually, if you wanted, something like what I had with Margaret. Marriage, partnership in the fullest sense. But only if that's what you want, Lila. Only if you choose it freely. Lila turned to look at him, really look at him. Ethan met her gaze steadily, his gray eyes reflecting the last light of sunset. In his face she saw patience, hope, and something deeper that made her heart race. I'm scared, she admitted. Every relationship I've seen, every example I've had, they've all been about power and control. About one person owning another. I don't know how to be with someone as an equal. I don't know if I'm capable of it. You're already doing it, Ethan pointed out gently. We've been equals for months now. The only thing that would change is acknowledging that we care about each other as more than just partners in running a ranch. And you'd be patient if I needed time to figure this out. Lila, I'd wait forever if that's what you needed. There's no timeline here, no pressure. I just wanted you to know that the option exists if you want it. Lila thought about all the times Ethan had given her choices, had asked for her opinion, had treated her decisions as important, thought about how safe she felt with him, how seen, thought about the way her heart lifted when he smiled, the way she looked forward to their evening conversations, the way she'd started thinking of we instead of I when she planned for the future. I want to try, she said finally. I want to see what more could mean. But slowly. Can we do it slowly? As slow as you need. Ethan reached out, palm up, offering rather than taking. Lila placed her hand in his, marveling at how natural it felt. How right. They sat like that as full darkness fell, hands linked, starting something new while honoring how far they'd both come. The winter that followed was hard in the way frontier winters always were. Cold, isolating, demanding constant work to keep animals fed and pipes from freezing. But it was also beautiful. Lila and Ethan grew closer through the shared hardship, learning to work together so seamlessly that they often didn't need words to coordinate. They established new patterns. Ethan would kiss her forehead before heading out to morning chores, gentle and chaste. Lila would lean against him during evening reading sessions, his arm around her shoulders. They held hands often, learning the language of touch that was affectionate rather than possessive. And Lila discovered that intimacy didn't have to be frightening. That being vulnerable with someone who cherished that vulnerability was different from being powerless with someone who exploited it. That love, because yes, she was starting to recognize it as love, could be a source of strength rather than weakness. One particularly brutal night in January, when snow piled against the windows and wind howled across the prairie, Lila woke from a nightmare about the auction. She'd been having them less frequently, but sometimes the past still ambushed her in sleep. She considered staying in her room, dealing with it alone the way she always had. But then she thought about what Ethan had said, that they were partners, that she didn't have to face things by herself anymore. So she unlocked her door and padded across the cold floor to Ethan's room, knocking softly. "Come in," he called, sounding alert despite the late hour. Lila opened the door to find Ethan sitting up in bed, reading by candlelight. He took one look at her face and set the book aside. "Bad dream?" She nodded. "Want to talk about it?" "Not really. I didn't want to be alone." Ethan shifted over, making space. "Come here." Lila climbed into the bed, and Ethan pulled the quilts over them both. He wrapped his arms around her, holding her close but not confining. Lila rested her head against his chest, listening to the steady rhythm of his heartbeat. "You're safe," he murmured into her hair. "You're here. You're safe, and nobody can hurt you. I promise." And Lila believed him, believed in the safety of his arms, in the future they were building together, in her own strength that had been there all along, just waiting for the right circumstances to emerge. She fell asleep like that, wrapped in Ethan's embrace, and didn't dream at all. Spring came eventually, as it always did. The snow melted, revealing the prairie in shades of brown and green. Cattle that had huddled together for warmth spread out to graze on new grass. The garden, carefully mulched and protected through winter, showed the first tender shoots of growth. And Lila, who'd arrived at this ranch as a girl sold for 3 coins, stood in that garden one morning and realized she'd become someone completely different, someone strong, someone capable, Someone who'd chosen her life deliberately and was building it with her own hands. "Lila!" Ethan called from the barn. "Come look at this!" She found him in the barn, grinning like a fool, pointing to one of the horses. The mare they'd been watching had finally foaled, a spindly-legged colt that was already trying to stand. "First foal born on our ranch," Ethan said. "Feels significant somehow." Our ranch. Lila loved how that sounded. "What should we name him?" she asked. "You choose. Feels right that you should name the first of what'll hopefully be many." Lila studied the colt, all legs and big eyes and determination to stand despite repeated failures. "Freedom," she said. "Let's call him Freedom." Ethan looked at her, understanding the weight behind the name. Freedom it is. That afternoon, they rode out to check the fence line together, a chore that had become almost meditative in its familiarity. As they rode, Ethan cleared his throat. "I've been thinking about something," he said. "What's that?" "About making things official, you and me." He pulled his horse to a stop and Lila did the same. "Lila Monroe, I know we've only been courting, is that what we're calling it, for a few months. And I know you've got every reason to be cautious about legal bonds after being bought and sold like property. But I love you. I love who you are, who you're becoming, who you've always been underneath all the fear and hurt. And if you'd be willing, I'd like to marry you, not to own you or control you, but to be your partner in every way possible." Lila's heart hammered in her chest. Marriage. The word should have terrified her. It represented everything she'd spent her life running from. But hearing Ethan say it, seeing the hope and vulnerability in his face, she felt only certainty. "Yes," she said. Ethan blinked. "Yes? You're sure? Because we can wait if you need more." "Ethan, I'm sure. I love you too. You've shown me what partnership really means, what love without power imbalance looks like. I want to build a life with you, officially and permanently. So yes, absolutely yes." Ethan dismounted in one fluid motion and pulled Lila down from her horse, lifting her into an embrace that took her feet off the ground. She laughed, actually laughed, full and free, as he spun her around. When he set her down, he cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs brushing her cheeks gently. "Can I kiss you?" Even now, he asked. Even now he made sure she consented. Lila loved him for it. "Yes," she whispered. The kiss was soft, tentative, neither of them entirely sure what they were doing, but it was theirs, freely chosen, and that made it perfect. They were married 3 weeks later in a simple ceremony at the community church, with Ruth and the Tanners as witnesses. Sarah cried happy tears through the entire service. Lila wore a new dress, pale blue, made by Sarah's mother as a wedding gift, and carried wildflowers from the prairie. When the preacher asked if she took Ethan as her husband, Lila answered with a voice that didn't waver. "I do." And when Ethan repeated his vows, promising to honor and cherish her, to be her partner in all things, to never claim ownership over her body or soul, Lila believed every word. The reception was held at the ranch, with neighbors bringing food and music and genuine joy for the couple everyone agreed was meant for each other. They danced, still badly, still stepping on each other's feet, and laughed and accepted congratulations from people who'd watched Lila transform from a frightened girl into a confident woman. As the evening wound down and guests departed, Lila found herself alone with Ethan on their porch, watching the stars emerge. "Mrs. Hale," Ethan said, testing the name. "I'm keeping Monroe too," Lila said. "Lila Monroe Hale. Want to honor where I came from even as I celebrate where I'm going." "Perfect. Suits you." They sat in comfortable silence, hands intertwined. Lila thought about everything that had brought her to this moment. The pain, the fear, the slow building of trust, the choice to love when every past experience told her it was dangerous. "Thank you," she said quietly. "For what?" "For kneeling. That first day when you could have just walked away, when you could have treated me like the property I was sold as. You knelt before me instead, and everything changed." Ethan squeezed her hand. "You changed it, Lila. You chose to hope when hope seemed impossible. You chose to trust when trust had only hurt you. You chose to stay and build something beautiful. That was all you." "We did it together," Lila corrected. "We saved each other, remember?" "Yeah," Ethan said softly. "We did." Years later, when people asked Lila to tell the story of how she and Ethan met, she would smile and say they'd found each other at exactly the right time. She wouldn't mention the auction, the 3 silver coins, the depths of despair she'd reached before Ethan appeared. Some things were private, sacred to the 2 people who'd lived them. But she would talk about the ranch they'd built together, about the children they'd eventually welcome, 2 daughters and a son, all raised to believe in equality and kindness. She'd talk about the community they'd helped establish, where women had voices and choices, where strength was measured in compassion rather than dominance. And sometimes, late at night when it was just her and Ethan on their porch with decades of partnership behind them, she'd remember that girl on the auction platform. The one who'd thought life was over, who couldn't imagine a future worth living. She'd remember, and she'd be grateful for everything that followed. For the man who'd knelt instead of commanded. For the life she'd chosen instead of endured. For the strength she'd discovered when someone finally gave her the space and safety to find it. She'd been sold for 3 silver coins. But she'd claimed herself for free, and that made all the difference. The end of one story, Lila would think, watching Ethan doze beside her. And the beginning of one infinitely better.